Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.
Revolution.
First, what is a revolution?
Revolution is the solution, hey.
The motive of a revolution.
Well, now,
The objective of a revolution.
be televised.
And the result of a revolution. And the methods used in a revolution.
I know you know. Put my
Well, that was odd. Well, that's unfortunate. It didn't play my intro video. You know what's funny is it'll probably start in a second here, so I'm just gonna play it.
Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.
revolution.
First, what is a revolution?
Revolution is the solution, hey.
The motive of a revolution.
Well, now,
The objective of a revolution.
be
And
televised.
the result of a revolution. And the methods used in a revolution.
I know you know. Put my gun away. Never gonna put my gun away. Put my gun away. See the mob, you better run away.
This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression.
Well, hello, Internet. Sorry about my wonky introduction there. StreamYard didn't want to cooperate with me today. Hope everybody is well. Hope everybody's having a good Memorial Day weekend. Happy Sunday. Tonight, I have a fun one. This will be a very interesting conversation. I have my friend Keith McHenry here, local Santa Cruz person, and he is the founder of Food Not Bombs and also the co-author, if I'm not mistaken, of the Anarchist Cookbook. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. Yep.
Man, that's a spicy one. All right, folks. I hope to see you in the chat. Wally World, Danger, good to see you. Keith, thank you so much for joining me, man.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been following you for quite some time, oddly enough. You might be surprised at that, but I certainly have been.
It's hilarious because I saw you on Jimmy Dore and I was like, oh, this guy's from Santa Cruz. I got to go follow him. And then we were already following each other. And I was like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
So that worked out well. So why don't you tell my very small audience, this is not as big of a show as Jimmy Dore. Hopefully I'll get there one day. But why don't you give a little background on yourself? Tell us about your background and also how you got into doing Food Not Bombs.
Okay. Yeah. So I grew up in national parks. And so my dad's father was a park ranger, a naturalist. And my grandfather actually was a chief naturalist at Yosemite, and he retired to Santa Cruz. And so I've been in and out of Santa Cruz since my first birthday, which was held up on top of the hill, overlooking Los Gatos, really. And my other yeah, that's why I mentioned it. And my grandmother, my mother's grandfather was a member of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, in the U.S. military, and he was actually in the military intelligence before the OSS started.
The precursor to the CIA.
Correct, the precursor, and he helped organize one of the more famous false flags, which was Pearl Harbor. He was involved in that. He died when I was 14, and he assumed I would. It's kind of surprising that he let my father marry my mother, but my family, my great grandfather started the U.S. military. He signed the U.S. Constitution. He was George Washington's staff for half of the Revolution, and then reassigned to Lafayette's staff. So he was the medic. He set up the field hospital, the Battle of Bunker Hill. That's where he met Washington, and he spent the winter in Mount Vernon. In Valley Forge. And in fact, if you go to Valley Forge or you visit the Valley Forge National Park Service website, you'll see that Washington felt that he played an important role in keeping the the army there happy through this brutal thing of so there was that. Then he signed. He's in the Continental Congress. He signs the U.S. Constitution. He's Secretary of War under Washington and Adams, and then under Adams is when he starts the U.S. military. So that's probably why my mom's father was like, okay, they're Rangers. That's nothing, but at least they're a part of the system. So during my education with my mother's father, John Vanderpool Phelan, he explained a number of things. First of all, the importance of false flags. I mean, he explained the reason they had to do Pearl Harbor is American people would not go to war with Japan unless they did it. And he was also he was the director of the most deadly bombing campaign in world history, even to this day, called Operation Meeting House, which is the firebombing of Tokyo. And he was very proud of that, and he would fly by after they drop all the petrobombs and then take a photo to see how far the fire had gone. He'd take a black and white 8x10 glossy, or maybe even bigger, but he had them framed, all 63 raids, on his wall in his den in Needham, Massachusetts. And I would watch him argue with over the phone with Robert McNamara, who at the time was Secretary of Defense, and his best friend Curtis LeMay. And
don't get my USS Liberty friends started on McNamara.
Yeah. And so my grandfather was trying to convince him to drop the atomic bomb on Hanoi to send a message to Soviet Union and then to China, and that was the purpose of it was a messaging, to kill that many people in a message. So anyway, I saw that whole thing. But then on my other side, my dad's father, who is on the way to be one of the first park rangers at Grand Canyon, he was a junior park ranger there. He fell asleep, or something had happened, and his car crashed, and Hopi farmers found him, and they took him to the oldest continually inhabited village in the United States called Old Oribe. And he convalesced there, and he actually is the only person to ever take a photo in an active kiva, the place underground where they have the religious ceremonies. And he took me there when I was in first grade and second grade to see the snake dances and the green corn dances. And at that time, there was no electricity in the Hopi land. They didn't have the high tension power lines. They had not. I've driven through the desert with my family under what is now Lake Powell, looking at the Anasazi ruins and so on. I watched them pour the footer for Glen Canyon Dam. So I saw this amazing, magical, spiritual area of the world. And then when I was, after that, I was given Walden by my father when I was in the fifth grade, and I had just learned to read, so I read On the Duty to Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau, and that shaped my political perspective dramatically.
When you were 5?
Fifth grade, so it's like yeah, not
still,
5.
Still,
Yeah.
Having a political perspective in the fifth grade's
the Vietnam War. Yeah, it is weird because because you got the Vietnam War happening, and I could see like Thoreau's opposite, not paying taxes because of the the money going to slavery and to the Mexican War. Now we have the Vietnam, and we have I was living in a segregated community, or my elementary school that I was going to at the time was white, and the one across the tracks was black. And then they were forced by the federal government to integrate, and so all the black people were deemed to have Down syndrome. I was deemed to have Down syndrome because I had dyslexia and I was not from the county. So I was in the Down syndrome class with all the black kids. And we had things like you could go to the local 5 and 10, and they had no black or colored only, whites only, and no Jews allowed signs that you could buy from Wacko, the same people that make the for sale signs now. So anyway, so all that was going on, and that really influenced me. So the Desecrate the Sacred Land, read On the Duty to Civil Disobedience by Thoreau, Vietnam War happening. So that it made, and then seeing my grandfather discuss things like, well, we only do elections in the United States for the purpose of dividing and conquering the population, so they're never a threat to power. And this is how power works. And one thing that I recall is when my grandfather, I spent the last summer of my grandfather's life with him in Needham, Massachusetts. And then he passed away. And then I went to his funeral, and his second wife was in the congregational church. And so they had a service there. And when the pastor said that he was such a godly man, that really enraged me, because he was very clear that there was no God, and then he was in a satanic organization that he joined probably when he was at Harvard Law, but maybe when he was at Dartmouth or even Phillips Exeter, where these are all schools where the spooks all go, right? George Bush Sr. went to the same high school as my grandfather. So, and George Bush Sr. became head of CIA. So I would hear all these stories about how society is organized from the perspective of the CIA and the mafia and all of that, which he had ties to. And he assumed I would be joining. He talked to me about white man's burden. I would have to kill all these people when I grew up. But the people I'm killing, they have no moral ambiguity. They're just dead. I mean, and he's telling me this when I'm like 7, when I'm 10, when I'm, 13. So, anyway,
Did you read Chaos? Did you read?
I haven't read Chaos, and I've been seeing a lot of people talk about it. I got to read it because, I wonder if, it's very interesting, the whole idea. A lot of people don't get how society works, but the intelligence community plays a huge role in that. I think, like, for instance, right now, there's a trial with Diddy or whatever, happening. And you start to see there that's the CIA Mossad connection to manipulating music and industry, that kind of thing. Then you have the Epstein story. There's another one. There's probably dozens of these blackmail campaigns happening, and that's why you, like, for instance,
this is what I talk about all the time.
Yeah, you'll never see like it's really crazy. And like Joan Baez, who I've fed many times. I fed her when she played at Passeum's when I started Food Not Bombs in Boston, Cambridge. I fed her at many political protests, and I invite her every year to Soup Stock. We just yesterday had our big 45th anniversary Food Not Bombs anniversary, and she never can come. She doesn't sing anymore. And then I start seeing her on YouTube singing all the time for Indivisible, which is this like AstroTurf organization funded by the Open Society Foundation, which also funded the NGOs that led to the coup in both Georgia and in Ukraine. And so if she's not able to sing for us, Food Not Bombs, and I've fed her and she knows me and I have friends that know her, but it's because we are too hot. And she comes to Santa Cruz and does ribbon cuttings for local NGOs here and stuff like that. So she only lives like an hour away. So it's really disappointing because I liked her whenever I fed her. But the fact that she couldn't bother to drive like 2 hours to even just say, I told her the last 3 times, just give a little talk. That's all. Oh, I can't do that. My voice. So anyway,
sounds like a plant.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people think both that and a lot of music industry. See, there must have been. Even like there's a stuff coming out about Elvis Presley being controlled by this same group of people, right? Makes sense. That's what. Yeah.
The thing is, it sounds insane to people that don't pay attention to any of this stuff. Even I think the vast majority of people, this kind of thing sounds insane. But once you understand or you learn about like the beginning of the FBI with J. Edgar Hoover and Meyer Lansky, and seeing the techniques they used to get people to do what they wanted and the whole sexual blackmail thing, you see these patterns repeating over and over and over, and you can't unsee it. And you start to see how our media is manipulated. Like right now, there's the whole weird thing in South Africa where all of the media organizations are all saying the same thing. Trump's unfounded statement that it's genocide in South Africa. And it's like this astroturfing of the South Africa situation, which is ironic because Trump's calling that a genocide and not Gaza. But that's for later in our conversation.
Right.
So when did you found Food Not Bombs, and what made you want to do that?
Okay.
And what is Food Not Bombs?
Okay, great. So when I by a sort of weird accident, ended up going to Boston University to study painting and sculpture, and I figured out at that age, I think it might have been, I guess whenever you go to college, 18, something like that, 17, that one of the best ways to make a living and have a full class load was to do produce work before you went to class. So I worked at a place called Bread and Circus, which is now a Whole Foods in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I would set up produce every morning, and I just was throwing it away. And then this guy comes by. He turned out to end up being a city councilor in Berkeley, Chris Worthington. But he was living in a Catholic worker house, a Broadway house, a few blocks away. And he asked if I had any food I was tossing out. I thought, wow, that's a great idea. So I gave him what he wanted. And then I took the rest to the housing projects on Portland Avenue, about 3-4 blocks away. And at public housing, it was like a group of mothers and all their kids playing and everything. And so I'd give them the food every morning before I go off to school. And then one day, the women there were like, look, they just opened this new building across the street. It's like a 7-story glass building where they're designing nuclear weapons. And I'm thinking, oh my God, these guys complain about the housing authority not fixing anything. And we got all this money for this shiny modern building across the street. So that's where I get the name Food Not Bombs. Then I was involved in trying to stop Seabrook Nuclear Power Station. And that's around the time of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and all these things. So there was a lot of concern about it. So I was up at the May 24th, 1980 occupation attempt of Seabrook with a bunch of my friends. And one of my friends, Brian Feigenbaum, a classmate, he was at Boston University Law School, got arrested. He got arrested. Back in those days, it was kind of cool. You didn't need to bring ID or anything like that, and they didn't have digital stuff, so everybody used the same name when arrested. But the problem was Brian actually spoke on TV on the network, local, news shows with his real name below him. So he was targeted because of that, got arrested for felony assault with a deadly weapon of a cop. And so we had to find somebody with some money to bail him out. So we did. We got him out that night, and on the way home to Boston, we said, well, we got to pay the guy back. Let's do bake sales. We thought that would be somehow, I'm 20. God, I just turned 22. I don't know why. I mean, I was like at 2 weeks into being 22 years old. And I was like, somehow thought that would make money. So anyway, we didn't make any money, but we had also this old van, and we had a moving company called Smooth Move. So we're moving this family, and they have like this poster they're throwing out. It says, wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber? But that's a great shtick. We could maybe sell more baked goods.
That.
Yeah. So we dressed up with military uniforms from our Army Navy surplus store, mounted that poster on cardboard, and set it up next to our card table at Harvard Square with our baked goods, and we told people we're trying to buy a bomber. And we even had like a little screw, or like a bolt on the table. We said, we've already raised the $1,500, or we're trying to raise $1,500 for a second bolt, because there was in the media at that time, it was, a 15-cent bolt was like $1,500 if it's going to go on a jet. It's a way of like scamming the public for money. So anyway, we had a lot of fun doing that. And then we were started this thing called the First National Bank Project, because we decided, well, everybody in Seabrook knows what's going on. We can't really, try to take over the plant power station anymore like we had been, because now it's radioactive, because they put they turned it on basically, or they're about to. It was not no way you could do it. Plus, the protests were like brutal, man. We were beaten, pepper sprayed, tear gas like crazy. It was unbelievable. But we spent years organizing each of the over 12 months organizing each protest. We even did because back when I played like varsity football, where you would like film with like Super 8 movie camera of what's going on. Well, we did that for ourselves when we pretend like we were trying to take over the plant. So anyway,
in the 70s.
In the 70s, so we would review it, our footage, like it was like a football game. So anyway, so we decided to do this protest, and one of the ideas that we had was to dress up like hobos and stand outside the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston, which was also the board of directors we'd found were all these like heads of local nuclear weapons industries as well as nuclear power industries. So I made a brochure of all the intercollecting board of directors and to hand out to people. And then we were like cooking and everything the night before, I think the 25th of March, 1981. And we were like, okay, we're going to go out. But we really feared we didn't get enough of our friends to agree to look like hobos and come out and be a soup line. And therefore the emotional impact that would have, that we had experienced with us being dressed as soldiers trying to do bake sale to buy bomber, would be missed. And so I went to the Pine Street Inn, which is a shelter from the Great Depression era. And I gave a speech at about midnight to all the guys hanging in there. And I said, look at, come to the protest. This is why we're doing it. And one of the guys was like, oh, this is great. A protest like the 60s. And then then the next day they show up. All the guys and most of the people in this shelter, which might have been 30 people, show up. And we're giving them food, and pedestrians are walking by going, oh my God, Reagan's only been in office 30 days and there are already soup lines in America and everything. And
wow.
Reagan is going to spend all this money on Star Wars and it's just going to be great, MX missile system and so on. And we're going to slash social services, just exactly like what is happening now in the current Trump administration. Almost a parallel, only maybe magnified. In fact, Trump even referred to a Golden Dome as being a continuation of Reagan's Star Wars. So anyway,
we're supposed to cut. We're supposed to cut spending.
Yeah, it seemed like he won an overwhelming vote to end wars and cut military spending and to make America great again, which for Americans would be it being great in America, not great in Israel or something. But anyway, right. So when we're doing that, the people that ate with us are like, you should do this every day. We have no food for homeless people in Boston. It's like, because homelessness wasn't a thing. You would never read an article in 1981 about homeless people. It was not a political issue. It was like a completely invisible thing. Usually what people thought of as homeless was the 30 guys in the Bowery in Manhattan that would try to wash their windshield with greasy rags. That was the entire worldview in America of homeless people, basically. So, or they were in the Great Depression. That was the last memory of homeless people. So we decided that night that we would just give 2 weeks notice at our jobs and do nothing but collect food that couldn't be sold from grocery stores and bakeries and produce markets and stuff. And then we deliver that in the midday to public housing, daycare centers, the Rosie's Place, the battered women's shelter, and so on. And then in the late afternoon, we'd start cooking in the afternoon, and then we would do the street performance with free food every night at either Harvard Square or the Boston Commons or something. And that's
really quick. If you wanted to start a Food Not Bombs today, California regulation would not allow you to do that. Well, we'll get to the point why that is funny. and how bad is homelessness now? It's ironic. Sorry, keep going. It's just
no problem.
Popped into my head.
Not a problem, because it kind of goes to the next part of the history of Food Not Bombs, which is somewhat important, which is that quite frankly, and I don't often say this in public, but I was driven out of Boston by the mafia, and I because they were going to kill me. And to be
the
quite
Italian
frank,
mafia, or
it was it was the Italian mafia was at the core of it, and it reminds me, the Diddy thing really reminds me of my personal experience there. So I had a graphic design company, and I was the third, I was like, there are two other design companies that might have been bigger than me. As far as the amount of stuff they're doing. And so I did all the Boston Celtics, Red Sox, New England Patriots graphic design. That was a client. And then I also had one of the top hair salons in America was another client of mine. And I would get invited to orgies by the marketing director of that company, which at the time I thought, well, I'm not interested in that. I'm married. I'm, monogamous. I've got a wife. I don't need any of this kind of chaos. It doesn't even interest me in the least. But I thought that, I only started thinking about how weird that was when this trial started. But then the other thing was that one of my clients, Donna Franca Franzaroli, had this General Travel was her company. And so I was making travel brochures for her for all expense paid trip to Palermo, Italy. And if I'd been reading the news more carefully, I would have realized that Palermo is where the mafia trials were, and there would be no logic to do a vacation there because they were shooting each other in the streets and bombing buildings and stuff. It would be the worst possible place to have a vacation. But what was happening was she was leasing jets, and she would have these travel brochures that I was designing, and the tour package would be one night in Zurich or one night in Rome. And then you go to Palermo for 7 days, and then you come back and to either Rome or Zurich, but not spend the night there, and then come back to the United States. So what her assistant eventually tells me before I have to disappear is that they were loading all the guns and illegal, drugs and everything in these planes, and then putting all these. They'd only advertised in the Midwest, so so it'd be senior citizen stuff from Iowa and Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, stuff like that. And so she targeted all the travel agencies in that geographic area. They'd buy the packages for really cheap. They'd go to Palermo. I would hear her arguing with customers in the many times of 30 days that I visited with her to review the project, being really angry. And it turned out they were just using these Midwesterners as a cover to do illegal business. Well, I worked for her for 30 days, and the governor of Massachusetts was Michael Dukakis, and he was running for president of the United States at that time as a Democratic Party candidate. Yeah. And he fails because of that wacky helmet on a tank photo. That's how they got rid of him. But anyway, so he and I and Donna Franca would sit there and talk for like 30 minutes about the opera or something like that. And we spent all this time, he visited twice in 30 days with the governor's car out and double parked in Commonwealth Avenue. And you start putting things together. She's apparently contributing to his presidential campaign and probably did to his governor's campaign. Well, anyway, it's pretty clear. I get some contacts from the media that I'm going to be killed. They've been telling me they're going to kill me. They got this guy that's going to kill me, blah, blah, blah. And Whitey Bulger is in this whole world. That's right?
Why I was asking. Yeah. Cause that was,
and I worked for fast food places that the Winter Hill gang ran. Because if you live in Boston in those days and you got to do minimum wage jobs, you're going to work for the mafia's, front organizations. And I remember I worked at Riley's Roast Beef, and I'd have to give a white envelope to a cop every Saturday night at, like 7 o'clock before everything got busy. And I did that for a long time. So, in fact, I almost never didn't have a contact with the mob. I worked for Budget Rent-A-Car, same thing. We would turn the odometers back to 40 miles after renting them for half a year, and then we'd sell them at the Lincoln Mercury dealership down the street. Then my boss burned the Lincoln Mercury dealership down, and then built a new, bigger one outside of town. All the, this is just what I saw as real life in my real life. So anyway, the sun is intense. So anyway, so that's why I moved to California, and I stayed underground. And but then I saw a friend of mine, acquaintance that I had had supported, named Brian Wilson, who was a Vietnam vet, and he was in Veterans for Peace. And he gets hit by a munitions trench at Concord Naval Weapons Station in Concord, California. And I'm like, oh my God, I was supported his Fast for Peace on the Boston Commons, and I'd run into them in a bunch of different places, and this was outrageous. So my wife and I go out to the Saturday protest against that. And then a bunch of people are tearing up the tracks where the train had run over Brian. So Brian had his legs severed by the munitions train. And he was in this movement called of Veterans for Peace called Nuremberg Action. And they would block these munition trains because they were taking weapons to the ships in Vallejo that would then sail down to Latin America to be used in the war against El Salvador and Nicaragua and Honduras. And that was some of what those weapons were going for. And so we went to that protest, and there were people tearing up the tracks. And so my wife and I, back then you had ABC, NBC, and CBS that we could get. If you had money, you could get CNN. That had just started. And so we're looking at, and we're in the foreground of all three newscasts, and it looks like we're directing the tearing up of the tracks. And you could see our faces. And so Andrea and I go, I guess we're not underground anymore. So Andrea knew how much I missed doing Food Not Bombs in Boston. So she said, you should try to do that. So go back to doing it. So I was working at this place called Bob's Typing, which has some pretty interesting surveillance stories related to that. In fact, I will do one right now, because while I'm doing Bob's Typing, this woman comes in, a very attractive woman, and she wants me to redo her resume. So I go, yeah, of course, and a cover letter. So he wants a cover letter to the president of KCBS Radio, and she wants me to take out her Peace Corps section of her resume. And so, you know how in the resume it goes from whatever year it was to present, had a military intelligence for the Pacific Rim. That's her top thing. And then at one point, this is where I learned the term information extraction. She had an undergraduate degree in information extraction from Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And she had her postgraduate degree in information extraction from Fort Ord. So anyway, then she becomes a KCBS reporter and interviews me quite a lot. So I've got photos of her interviewing me. It's like when I'm getting arrested as a Santa. But anyway, because if I thought I was going to get beat up by the cops in something that was a high-profile arrest, I would wear a Santa costume. So it kind of minimizes the violence. But anyway, so I went to, but while I'm working at Bob's Typing, and after I see this event with Brian and Wilson and everything, so I start to go during my lunch break at Bob's Typing, going up and down the street, asking if people had food they wanted to. Tom's Natural Foods, House of Bagels, so on. So pretty soon I've got this whole route going where I'm picking up all this produce that can't be sold and all this bagels and breads and pastries, and I'm taking them to Glide Memorial Church Soup Kitchen, to St. Anthony's Soup Kitchen, Martin DePore Soup Kitchen, and I just do that for a while. And then I try to figure out where to set up Food Not Bombs, and I try UN Plaza, but it was like so windy and horrible there. But I did meet these two guys just graduated from University of Maryland in the study of the 60s. So they were like really into this idea. So then we decide that we're going to do it at Golden Gate Park every Monday, because we find out that the soup kitchen only serves Tuesday through Friday. There's a church on Saturday that serves, and a church on Sunday that serves. No meals for the people living in Golden Gate Park or Haight-Ashbury on Mondays. So we set up at the entrance to Golden Gate Park at Haight and Stanton, and it's going really great. And then this hippie comes by, and the Dead would tour, and they would be a lot of people in town for a bit while they're playing at the Oakland Coliseum or something. And it's like fantastic. I'm thinking, wow, we're America's most liberal city. It's all fantastic, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, one day a hippie comes by and he said, how you can get a permit for this? And we had like this little piece of paper we gave the city of Cambridge for street performing, so they could return our stuff if we left it on the street. So I kind of thought that's what this would be. So I write a letter to the Parks Department to get the permit, and we don't hear from them. And the cops start walking by every month and say, hey, did you get this permit? And I go, I'll look into it. So I go down to the Parks Department.
You snitched yourself out.
Yeah. So, and see, I'm living in San Francisco under an assumed name, because I'd learned this from my friends in the Weather Underground. So I had booked everything as Dick Lee.
Oh, wait, hold on. You just glossed over that really quick. You had friends in the Weather Underground?
Yeah, of course.
Of course you did. You co-wrote the Anarchist Cookbook. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, and my friend, they taught me, like, you move to a town. This is back when you had white pages, the physical book, and they said try to find the name that has the most and choose that name for everything that you do. So that's what I did. So I was Dick Lee in San Francisco. I was Michael Sullivan, of course, in Boston. But so anyway, so I I go down there and I'm like, where's this permit? And they're like, we never heard anything about it. We'll leave a message and stuff. And then on August 15th, 1988, all these riot police come out of Golden Gate Park and they arrest 9 of us, me first, even though I just come there with Andrea and a camera to take pictures, because we started hearing rumors, like my truck got towed when I was in the hospital for 7 days before that with a ruptured appendix. And so, one of the guys I met from Maryland, he got arrested driving my truck because he had a Maryland driver's license in the state of California, blah, blah, blah. It's a total phony thing, but a reason to stop somebody if you need to. So anyway, we knew something was going to happen on August 15th, but we weren't too sure. So then they do the arrest, and there's a guy takes a picture of it, Greg Garr, beautiful black and white photo, and that gets in the Chronicle the next day on page 3, all columns across, and people locally are freaked out by that, and so they figure out how to get a hold of me and everything, and so we plan a big march down Haight Street with food and banging pots and pans, and then we get another 24 people arrested on August 22nd, and at that arrest there happened to be 2, and I find this out about maybe 4 years ago in a FOIA documents, that there were 2 Freedom of Information Act request documents, and they were
Feds.
Yeah, it turned out the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force observed the arrests, and they wrote a memo on August 29th, 1988 to the San Francisco field office saying that we were a credible national security threat. So, which is amazing when you consider there's 9 of us getting arrested. You might have said there were 12 San Francisco Food Not Bombs activists. There's 10 Food Not Bombs activists had been calling themselves Bread Not Bombs, but we convinced them at the Nevada test site to change their name to Food Not Bombs because they thought it was copywritten Food Not Bombs, and we're like, no, we're anarchists. Just use the name. It'd be great. There'll be like a Boston Food Not Bombs, a San Francisco Food Not Bombs, and a Long Beach, California Food Not Bombs. There'll be 3 chapters, and that was the national security threat, right? So, and then that Thanksgiving, we had the Food Not Bombs buttons, purple fists and so on, and people would go home for Thanksgiving and they have it on their coat, and they'd be waiting to come back at the airport, and then a National Guard person in uniform would come up. They were waiting for the same flight or the flight in the gate next to it, and they'd say, oh, wow, we just studied Food Not Bombs. That's America's most hardcore terrorist group. So that is when we started realizing we were considered a terrorist group. Oddly enough, again, in April of 2009, I was on a speaking tour, and I spoke at Princeton University, and I go back to the fancy place where speakers sleep in Princeton, and the woman like, oh, this is where you got room 7. That's where Condoleezza Rice stayed last week. And I was like, oh, I hope they washed the sheets. And then anyway, so I ended up in the. I couldn't figure out all their gizmos. They had something to operate the bed. I've never had an electronic thing that operates the bed, so I got rid of that. And I didn't need the air conditioning, but I figured out how to get the TV on. And they had, and C-SPAN was on, and that's what I would prefer to watch because I don't want that jumping around from thing to thing on TV. And so they have a lecture, and it's a State Department official at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts, and he's speaking about who's more dangerous, the people serving vegan meals in the park or Al-Qaeda? And his conclusion is that Al-Qaeda is probably not going to last another 20 years because it's just not very appealing to strap bombs on yourself and blow yourself up. And they're losing membership as a result. But the people that serve the vegan meals, they are a direct threat to the United States because they're trying to convince the American public that money should be diverted from military spending to education, healthcare, and other social services. And had I only seen that once, I would have like thought I was kind of hallucinating, didn't put two and two together. But then I spoke at Harvard Law about 3 or 4 days later, and I'm back at my dad's place in Hingham, and I'm watching, turn the TV on again, and it's the exact same place on C-SPAN where that lecture's happening. And I'm like, whoa, they actually are concerned that the American public might start thinking money should be diverted from military spending to healthcare, education, and other social services, and that is why we are one of America's most hardcore terrorist groups. So kind of all makes sense if your system is so fragile that just American people demanding something reasonable is a threat to power, then you've got real problems in your country.
Is it ironic to you that everything you just described is anti-authoritarian, anti-war, against big government, against the military-industrial complex, and that's who everybody went after. And now everybody in the government, that's who the government was going after. And now there seems to be like this polarity shift where the anti-war people, the pro-free speech people seem to be, I'm not talking about like the hardcore rhino neocon people, but like the libertarian right, they seem to be the threat to national security now, and it seems that there's more people on the left that are pro Ukraine war, anti-free speech, like all the suppression of speech during COVID. Don't say anything about the vaccine. You're like a OG leftist. Have you noticed this polarity shift in?
Oh, it is frightening because I'm an anarchist. I wrote the Anarchist Cookbook. I've been an anti-war activist my whole life. I was organizing against Pfizer and Moderna and DARPA and gain of
now
function.
People are getting Pfizer tattoos during COVID.
Yeah, and it was incredible. So in Santa Cruz, when COVID happened, I was working on my memoir. I was at a writing workshop down in Guatemala, and 2 days after I arrived in the United States, we got COVID lockdown, and so they shut down all the soup kitchens in Santa Cruz because they were indoors, and then the homeless had no place to eat. And the city government's proposal was, and what they did but failed at, was they put up chain link fences in all the downtown parking lots with a portable toilet. And a stack of plastic water bottles, and they were going to force all the homeless into these stockades all around downtown. And they tried to, Justin Cummings, the then mayor, tried to convince me to lure people into these places. He came to the Funapam's meal and tried to get us to, with your, if you convince people to go into these cages, that would be really great because the homeless.
Hey, we set up these concentration camps. You think you could help us round up everybody and put them in the cars and into the concentration? That's
exactly. It was unbelievable. So anyway, of course, I refused, and we got jacked up. I think we were, they even made a law against us serving food at the town clock, which is where we serve now.
I'm surprised there. I went down there last weekend, and I was surprised that you guys didn't get chased out of there. And it's funny because everybody down there was so nice. Everybody was super nice to me, but you had a bunch of young kids down there, and I wonder if they realize, like, do they understand the history and like your background and everything, and like, do they know that they're involved in what was formerly considered a terrorist organization? Or they
and I suspect we are still considered a terrorist organization, possibly at this current point, because of our feeding protest against the genocide. So, which is, that's a terrible thing to be doing. But and I think a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people, but I'm always surprised at what people do know. It always freaks me out. But this is what's incredible about this philosophical ideas that Funapams has. We went through this huge long ordeal in San Francisco being arrested. So in the end, we were arrested there were over 1,000 arrests of Funapams volunteers for serving food. I was arrested 94 times, and according to the district attorney, Arla Smith, I did 500 days in jail. and that's due to my plea bargain with the city. I was facing 25 to life, and they were sending riot
For what?
police. Okay,
25 for life.
so I got framed by the mayor, and then and probably even more deeper than that. In fact, that I can go into the whole corruption of
The
San
mayor of Santa
Francisco.
Cruz? Oh, San
No,
Francisco.
this is the mayor of San Francisco, Frank Jordan. So he, his film commissioner, who was the son of some wealthy campaign contributor, who was attacked me coordinated with the police and maybe even the FBI and others, in a phone booth in City Hall after he had my truck towed from a legal parking space. And I've never had any problems pulling up to this legal space, getting out, unloading all the food, setting up and serving people. But this was back right when flip phones were invented. And so all of a sudden, this miraculous thing, I could see this guy who I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just some kind of rich kid because he had these weird white shoes and he looked like completely, like he just got him off a golf course, it was a golf, caddy or something. But anyway, so he tows my truck. So I go into the phone booth at the first floor of City Hall, and you got to go through the metal detectors because remember there was Milk and Moscone got killed, and then metal detectors appeared. And I was in Berkeley living there when that happened. So then I'm in the phone booth, like calling up to find where my truck, which, where do I pay? Do I go down to parking traffic, pay the fine, and then what wharf is my truck now on? I got to go get it. So anyway, he starts beating me up inside the phone booth, and so I tell the lady at the tow company, I said, or parking traffic, whatever it was, there's a guy beating me up. I need to get off the phone and go to another phone. So I walk upstairs and I make the call back to find where my truck is. And as I'm coming, and I'm wearing a chef's hat and a chef's coat with the Food Up Bombs logo on both that was donated by a local, vendor in Santa Cruz that just San Francisco that gave me. In fact, I wore that all day yesterday at the soup stock. But anyway, so I'm walking down the rotunda, that beautiful stairway, and there's these three guys, two in business suits and a uniformed officer, and they're holding this little book, and they say, "Hey, Keith, come over." And I go, "Yeah, what's up?" Because I was actually friends with the cops, even if they're arresting me all the time. And so I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" And they go, "Oh, you're under arrest for assault, battery, strong-arm robbery. That's a felony under the new three strikes law." So I'm in. I eventually get bailed out. I get we get a fax from Amnesty International saying any Food Up Bombs kids, volunteers that get arrested will be considered, prisoners of conscience, and will call for your unconditional release. So I'm walking with that copy of that fax to all the board of supervisors, and I go into Barbara Kaufman's office, and Nancy Kitts is in there. I said, "Oh, give this to Barbara," and she hated us. She was like the Rush Limbaugh kind of San Francisco at that time. She had this radio show, and she was, that's when Newsom was in the Republican Party, and he was one of her darlings, and so on.
Wait, hold on. Newsom was in the Republican Party?
Yeah, he used to be the head of the Republican Party in San Francisco. So, yeah, we used to protest outside his mansion all the time when he would have fundraisers for George Bush and stuff.
How do I not know this? Newsom used to be a Republican?
Yeah, and then he switched to a Democrat, and then he was the one that, and then started pushing for gay marriage in San Francisco, and then that mobilized the Republicans, and the whole thing was manipulated like that. So that's we used to always go up to his mansion and then denounce George Bush and stuff. So anyway, so we so I ended up getting charged with a second strike. Nancy Kitts slams the door on this friend of mine, and I put my hand up to stop it, and my hand ends up going through this thin glass that turned out to be lower part of like the middle of the door, like a kind of like you can't. It wasn't really glass. It's that pebbly thin glass stuff that's indoors, and so it cut my hand, and so I go to the second floor bathroom, get a bunch of paper towels, go outside, and I go to my lawyer, which fortunately was right across the street, although that was of no help. And then I get my truck, which was fortunately just parked in front of my lawyer's office on Van Ness. And then I get surrounded by police, sheriff's department, and then I get arrested, and I get my second and third strike. Because my third strike is when the cops were arresting us every day for serving food in front of City Hall, what we would do is go to vegetarian restaurant on Market Street, borrow all their milk crates, set them up as tables because they kept stealing all our tables, and they wouldn't give them back to us. The cops kept holding them for evidence, and so then eventually, what I ended up doing it, so I get, because I allegedly, the first case, I supposedly stole the $99 beeper from Nick Rommel, the film commissioner, which they never found the beeper, but the proof of it is he went to a beeper store and bought one. People don't even know what beeper or pagers are. Well, I guess you know pagers now because of the Lebanese attack. But anyway, so that's what, I get the 3 strikes from that. And that's how I plead out. But what we used to do is we realized the very first time we got arrested, like homeless people are freaking out that all the food is being stolen, right? So we didn't want like people getting hurt and stuff. So we decided we would have this system where we divide the food into thirds. So we would come out with, and then these milk crates was possession of stolen property, which relates to the stolen beeper, which made it a strike. So we always heard these stories, people, you stole a slice of pizza. The reason that you got a strike is for a slice of pizza is because you stole something else in one of the first strike or second strike, right? So that's how you get your third strike for something stupid. In my case, 24 Berkeley Farms dairy milk crates. So anyway, all of these. So what we do is we divide the food and put it in white 5-gallon buckets. But the first wave of people that would come in, they would have almost no food in it, and they would serve, but you knew they were going to get arrested pretty fast. So they'd get arrested. Then another group would come in with another decoy amount of food. They'd get arrested. And then we'd come in with all the food and feed everybody. So that's how we did it every single day. And we would hide it in the parking garage underneath City Hall. We had all these tricks, and the cops were always trying to capture us. And the fountain was all flooded in front of City Hall. It was a beautiful reflecting pool. So we had people would wait in there and serve the food. And then the cops the union wouldn't let them get in the pool for safety reasons to avoid that, and then they try to bat the food away when we're trying to serve it, and they would, so this went on and on and on. It was quite extensive campaign of repression, and so the milk crates were used for the table, and that became the part of the 3 strikes. But all of these things created this huge interest in the media, particularly my 3 strikes case, but even the original ones, like the day that the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force believed we were a national security threat, was also the arrest that ended up being in the New York Times, on CNN, on London, Times of London, and so on. And so people would start to write letters to me. I don't even know how they figured out my address, because I had a mailbox, etc. address, and my answering service at mailbox, etc. on Polk Street. And the poor guy there, he got so many calls. He said, "Man, sure, it's like unlimited calls for $5 a month, but I had to hire 2 people at $5 an hour to just answer your phone when you got arrested." So anyway, we had to come up with some other way. So anyway, so I got so many requests for that. I made a flyer called 7 Steps to Starting Food Not Bombs, which based on my notes from how I started the second Food Not Bombs chapters, because it was kind of more methodically how I did the San Francisco one, as opposed to how we fell into the original one in Boston. And so then I would mail that to people, and more groups started. So then we started seeing we saw a little tiny, like 3-paragraph article in the Chronicle about how Native Americans in Arctic Circle, Alaska, in the town of Arctic Circle, Alaska, had announced that they wanted to have an indigenous people's protest during the 500th anniversary of Columbus coming to the Americas on October 12th of 92 in San Francisco. And Pelosi was able to arrange San Francisco to be the national city for the 500th, the quincentennial, because she claimed, and the Congress voted to accept it, that the longest happening Columbus Day parade was on Columbus Ave in San Francisco. So that's why there was a big celebration there, and why Native people from all over the world really ultimately came there to protest. So we had our first World Food Not Bombs gathering in a couple of days before that, and then we fed the protest. And in that gathering, there's only 75 of us, and the only internationalness of it was maybe 2 people from Canada. Otherwise, it was, even though we had groups in Australia and we had groups in other countries, not a lot of them, but a few, like one in Brixton in England and so on. People didn't have money and resources to come. We may not have even been able to advertise to them. You had to do it by mail. So anyway, so we come to this opinion that we're going to have three principles: that the food is always vegan or vegetarian and free to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober. That there'll be no headquarters, presidents, or directors, that each chapter would be autonomous and they would make decisions using consensus, and they would include the people depending on the food to participate in the direction of the local Food Not Bombs chapter. And that third, that we wouldn't be a charity, but that we'd be dedicated to taking nonviolent direct action to change society, so no one had to live in the streets or eat at a soup kitchen. So that agreement was then reconfirmed at the second World Gathering in San Francisco, the second World Gathering, which was in San Francisco, during the founding of the United Nations celebration in June of '95. So we planned a 10-day gathering at that point, and we had all kinds of workshops on making giant puppets and banners and stuff like that. But we also had these. We were all running. A bunch of us were running pirate radio stations. So I have San Francisco Liberation Radio. My friend had, Free Radio Berkeley. Stephen was one teaching us how to make our transmitters, and so we had classes on how to make transmitters, and we had our own radio station just for the gathering. We also I was involved in a project called that same year in '92 called Homes Not Jails, where me and some people from the tenants union organized this thing during the savings and loan crisis, because there's all these abandoned buildings in San Francisco, and there was nobody claiming really ownership, because there might be 30 mortgage companies, as the whole scam of fleecing the American people through the savings and loan crisis is. And there's actually a really intense connection to that in Iran Contra and Bill Clinton and all Poindexter and all those people, which which if younger people don't know was the covertly arming Contras and fighting wars in Latin America, covertly, but mostly to bring cocaine into the United States and poison the country. That was a huge reason why they were doing that. And Gary Webb's Dark Alliance, I think it is, in the Mercury News, the guy that shot himself twice to death.
What's funny is I got San Jose Mercury News called me when I was running for office, and of course I brought up Gary Webb. They did like a little 5-minute interview with me, and I brought up Gary Webb. They never aired that interview.
I can imagine. Yeah. You may have noticed in the local media there was not one story about the amazing 45 years of Food Not Bombs. Even though I sent press releases repeatedly to the Sentinel and everything like that. Yeah, they don't want anything that's not in their trip about making a lot of money, supporting the war effort, all that. And they certainly don't. Well, it's funny that the Mercury News would have the Gary Webb story, because then you have Susanna from the San Jose Police Union, who used their UPS account, FedEx account, and everything to mail the largest amount of fentanyl chemicals across America, with the alternate address being the Union.
Right. And that story disappeared really fast. That story disappeared as fast as the missing ammonium nitrate and the bio lab out in Reedley, California. Those stories. Yeah,
those are really famous. Yeah, really famous disappearing major stories that should be major and are not. Yeah, see how things are run. So,
one thing I really want to talk to you about, though, is the homeless industrial complex and all these non-governmental organizations that are paying the executives of these organizations or companies or whatever you want to call them insane amounts of money, and they're doing, in my opinion, the opposite of what you're doing. Again, I'm right of center, so I have probably some conflicting views from you on how to go about addressing the homeless crisis. But I see what you're doing as righteous and good. You're trying to feed people, and you're not out there. And I don't know if you agree with it or not, but I am very against the handing out of fentanyl needles and also what they call safe injection sites. And seeing what has happened from when I was a kid to now, all over the Bay Area, San Jose, Santa Cruz, even though Santa Cruz is in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, how it's spiraled out of control. to me, a lot of it has been perpetuated by these NGOs, and I'd like to get sort of your thoughts on kind of all of that.
Yeah, so the local NGOs like Funding Matters, as the homeless call it, Housing Matters, the what used to be the homeless service center, until they spent like who knows how many hundreds of thousands rebranding themselves to be called Housing Matters. These NGOs are exactly like the NGOs that Open Society and Ford Foundation and National Endowment for Democracy and all funded to overthrow like other governments, right? It's all like the same network. It's a seamless network.
The USAID stuff.
Yeah, USAID stuff, all of that is
And
all
Open
like
Society Foundation, just for you guys who don't know, that's George Soros.
Yeah,
Foundation.
George Soros Foundation. He's the one that's been providing millions of dollars to Indivisible, and so that's a whole AstroTurf Democratic Party protest against Trump, and it'll really ultimately go nowhere, thankfully, because people really don't want to vote for Democrats. But and you'll notice none of them show up at any of the Gaza protests, Palestinian protests, because they're Zionists that started it, and and they have a hands-off NATO because they want the war to overthrow Putin. That's their goal. So anyway, so it's all linked together. Then there's a really interesting book that influenced me when I started Food Not Bombs, or maybe even just before it, called Regulating the Poor by Francis Fox Piven. So the entire homeless industrial campaign complex started in earnest during the Great Depression, and it was Rockefellers and these people started having the community chest and just trying to buy people off so they wouldn't riot and stuff, because there's already all these riots because nobody has any food and so on. So that it comes out of that background as social control. And so I worked for United Way of Tucson and Southern Arizona as their graphic designer, and I was part of the team to rebrand United Way, which graphically, or artistically. And oddly enough, 9/11 happens while I'm working there, and that put the whole agency into a tizzy. And so we had to start calling our agencies to explain to them that none of their employees could be if they were ever seen at a protest against the war. I think at Afghanistan at the time. Maybe it was they already knew they were going to. No, it actually was Iraq, even though that's a ways off. So we had to call everybody up, and I was sat, and I could hear the vice president of United Way of Tucson and the other cubby talking to her people she was assigned to call, and we told everybody in the nonprofit agencies, of which the Tucson Food Bank was one of them, and all the homeless services and immigrant rights services and disabled kids services and all that, and tell them if any of their employees were caught signing a petition against the war, seen at a protest against the war, a letter to the editor against the war, any visible way of expressing their opposition to the war, United Way would defund them, because our money was coming from the employees of Raytheon Missile Systems and David Mothman Field. Those were our main clients. Not long after that, I get fired probably a week after 9/11. Turns out because of my association with Food Not Bombs, which is why I got hired in the first place, because I had done Food Not Bombs. But
you got the Dixie Chicks treatment.
Yeah, and then it got even better than that in a certain way. Because then I get another job, and I'm mysteriously fired pretty quickly after that. I got a third job at Sun Sounds Radio for the Blind as their marketing director, and Mitzi brings me into her office and says, "I got a call that I have to let you go because you're on a blacklist. You're not allowed to work in the United States." And that was my last, job where you file out, forms to have a job, and. So anyway, so that is how they play through that. So what that shows you, so we can see in Santa Cruz with the homeless industrial complex, it is really important for them that there be homeless people, that they can, always need a lot more homeless people because you got to get a lot more money. and then the local games that are played. So, for instance, there was the Sentinel had an article that Jeff Bezos Foundation had given Housing Matters $2.3 million, something like that. 30 days later, the Sentinel has an article about how the Housing Matters has to shut the River Street shelter. So, I asked Phil Kramer, the head of it, like, you just got over $2 million, and then you're shutting the shelter down. Why don't you use some of that $2 million to keep that shelter open? Because you just forced 50 more people back into the streets, which is useful for them to see a bunch of people in the streets, right? So then he said, well, that comes from a different budget. That money was for this. When Dr. Ratner took over Housing for Health, he was in Alameda County before that, doing similar thing. You can see how successful he was at housing homeless people in Alameda County for 16 years or whatever. I think he was there for 16 years, maybe only 10. But anyway, so I call him up to welcome him because, let's get homeless people into housing, and that's a surefire way to end homelessness, is to facilitate ways to people to make a living wage, to have drug rehab on demand. You can't imagine how many people come to me in the years that want to get into Janus or someplace, and you can't get them in. So there are people that are so finally at the end of their ropes and can't do another.
And they want to get clean.
They want to get clean. I run into people. In fact, I had a wonderful volunteer yesterday at Soupstock who, to get clean, his case manager, Elise was cool. He hooked me up with her, and he said because of the policies, he has to be either in a house or a motel to go to rehab. And so I got him a hotel room at the Santa Cruz Motel for one night. It turned out there was some complication, so they couldn't pick him up the next morning. So I got him a second night, and he's clean and sober right now, and his whole life has changed, and it's an amazing thing. He's been clean and sober for 2 years or something since I did that. So it's that simple of a thing.
This is what drives me crazy about these NGOs, though, that are out there handing out needles. Have you seen the guy J.J. Smith out in San Francisco? He's always documenting all this stuff.
I haven't seen J.J. Smith. I've been watching Darren on World Peace Movement. Yeah, he and I follow each other too.
he's a funny dude. So
I know,
J.J. Smith,
I am the World Peace Movement. What are you talking about, Daryl?
he's a good dude. I like Daryl.
He's a good guy.
Darren. So J.J. Smith documents. He really focuses on these NGOs and handing out needles and stuff. And there's countless videos of him going up to them, because they roll up. It's like an ice cream truck for drug addicts, because they roll up, they take out all these tables, and they hand out literally crack pipes, needles, the Bunsen burners, the foil, the things to tape off your arm when you inject. And ironically, they hand you all of that stuff in single-use plastic bags, the same bags that are outlawed at the grocery store. But that's a whole nother conversation.
That's funny.
But he always asks them the same thing. He's like, "Hey, I got some people that want to get clean. Do you have any information on rehab or any sort of outreach for that?" They never have any information. It's like all they want to do is keep people perpetually addicted.
Yeah, see, this is an important feature of how the government works and how NGOs are a branch of the government. And my grandfather, when he was stationed in Burma doing Operation Meeting House, his other task was to set up the heroin distribution to the black community in the United States. And he explained this in detail over and over again. So they had opium and they're harvesting in Burma, and they're making it into heroin, and they're using the mafia to bring it to the U.S. And the purpose of it is to flood the black community, because they were worried that at the end of the war, the GI Bill would be not equal between blacks and whites, and you got black and white men, mostly men, dying together in the ships and in trenches and so on, and that they would expect. They've now that really damages racism a bit, because you've had to depend on a person of the opposite race to survive, right? So he goes, yeah, we'll just flood the black community. They'll all fight each other over heroin. They'll be busy being nodding off and all that. So then when you get
the same time period that they introduced welfare for, single mothers, but you only get it if you're a single mother, not if a man's in the in the situation, ironically.
Yep. Yep. And then the other things that they do is they like, you have the Clinton and Biden, both their different crime bills and stuff, so that you get a lot more, people of color, but poor people like having felonies, and therefore they can't be with their families in public housing. That's still to this day. I mean, that's the problem with my friend that just, that helped me yesterday. His wife and daughter have to live in one house because it's HUD housing, and he finally got into another house, but he can't leave living with his, they don't have enough money collectively to live together outside of the confines of HUD housing, because he had criminal problem in the past, as one would have if you're strung out on drugs, and therefore they can't live in the same room together, even though they're perfectly happy with each other. And I think that ultimately he is doing so well that he'll get like a job that pays enough to actually really rent something in this area. At least I hope so, but that's not easy either. But then the other thing is like, so I have a relative who was homeless and crashed with us for way longer than we really wanted, and and
you talked about this on Jimmy Dore.
Yeah, and then it took me like it took my girlfriend, who's a social worker at she's a licensed medical social worker. She spent like 18 months trying to get him into housing and finally did. But it's because the whole NGO thing is designed to make sure you don't get into housing, and you lose your case. They don't pay the case managers enough to be a living wage, so they leave right away because you can't afford to live on that wage. But then the heads of all these NGOs are making $500,000, $2 million,
right,
while the workers aren't making anything. And then our NGOs here, both the Food Bank and Housing Matters, and they keep doing. They use their clout to push the agenda of the downtown business community, right? So they're like, we want local control on these high-rise smart city. They're making Santa Cruz a 15-minute smart city, and
what?
So yeah, it'll be completed shortly. But yeah, that's why all these high-rise buildings in Santa Cruz, no one here really wanted them. We actually had a ballot initiative to allow us to at least vote on the height of each building as a community. The community had organized for years to stop the downtown library project where the farmers market is, and cutting all the old trees and everything down there because we don't really need it. And they're tearing down many of our historic buildings. They don't have parking. They have a one-floor parking garage in each of these buildings.
Where are they building these? Oh, along there. Yeah, they're building one.
Front. Well, there's 38 of them. So you got Front Street, a bunch of them there.
That's the one right up against the levee, right?
Yeah, and they're going to build
That's my running route.
Oh wow, yeah. So and then where the Warrior Stadium and that whole area down there, they're going to raise all of that and build like these tall skyscrapers there. They've got more skyscrapers up in West Cliff. They've got 3 of them at Water, or at least 2 at Water and Branza Forte. There's a total of 30. Then they've got some on Ocean Street.
Oh, we can't get an In-N-Out burger.
Yeah. And then I know my stepson drives to Salinas to In-N-Out Burger often. It's like crazy. But then they're doing all that. And then we just got approached. I have to go find this email because I should share it with the rest of the local Food on Bombs chapter. But so there's a thing called Workbench. So before Workbench, they're both. Workbench is one of the largest developers now in Santa Cruz, which used to be a tiny little company, really. I had a friend that worked for him. Seemed tiny at the time anyway, when my friend worked for him. But now they're building they're now going to build a couple of these large mega projects, and one of them is called Clock Tower Center. So they're going to take the area of, it doesn't seem like a very big piece of property, but there's a bank there and a bar and a real estate company and then I think an accounting office and stuff. They're going to level that and build originally it was going to be an 18-story tower. Now I think it's gone to, 12.
But this is all part of the freaking grift. This is all part of the lies that they say. You hear all these politicians assemblymen, state senators, I'm talking about California politicians, assemblymen, state senators, and Gavin Newsom always talking about we need to build housing to solve the homeless problem. And they're talking about the state building housing. And to me, these are completely separate issues. Yes, homeless people need to get into housing, but they need programs to get clean. They need programs, like you say, to be able to get jobs, to be able to support themselves. Not taking taxpayer dollars, giving these no bid contracts to unions that are going to inflate the price, funnel money back into their campaigns, and then build these high-rise buildings that they call affordable housing. When to fix to me, the housing problem is just that housing is so damn expensive because we don't have inventory. And that's why 41-year-old me and all my friends can't own homes. We need to be able to build. Like, why can't we buy land and build? These are two separate problems. They conflate them as the same problem all the time, and it drives me insane. And these high-rise buildings that they're building all over the place, this isn't to fix the homeless problem. This is another massive money laundering operation, in my opinion.
Exactly. See, they sell it, particularly like, it turns out, I think Jimmy Dore on the last time I was on him, he pointed out that in LA, people always vote to raise their own taxes to help the homeless. But it went, and like James Lee had said in the introduction to that comment of his, that the head of the housing authority in LA makes $500,000, but she's also in another nonprofit making another, millions and millions, or $500,000 or whatever. And they're all like that.
Valencia Adams Kellum, and she makes, her annual salary is $430,000 a year, and she funneled millions into her husband's nonprofit, and then she spent $800,000 silencing whistleblowers.
Yeah, and that's what happens in every California city of any magnitude. I'm sure there's a similar system in San Francisco. We definitely have that system here.
San Jose seems to be actually trying to get it right. Mayor Matt Mahan out there actually wants to fix the homeless problem and not use it as an excuse to funnel more money into the pockets of NGOs and politicians.
Yeah, I think that the city of San Jose has already been kind of developed. It's captured by, by by these grifters already, so they don't really have to worry about it. My girlfriend actually, her job is to get people at the local hospital in San Jose into housing, she's as a medical social worker. So then when she had trying to get a relative into housing, she has direct experience, and she does say compared to when she worked at Dominican here in Santa Cruz, there was a lot more options in San Jose. So you're absolutely right about that. That's like her direct experience. It still was somewhat frustrating to get people into housing, but it definitely is easier in San Jose. They've got other problems with dealing with homeless people, like using AI to find camps and so on, with not real good relationship between capturing the homeless people and then getting them into facilities that work. But at least they kind of have that as a vision. Whereas over here, see, that's the thing. If you had, and then Proposition 1 and forced drug rehab and incarceration, which is what Newsom just has been touting in the last month. Every city will cut off your city funding if you don't start capturing the homeless and force them against their will into these mental health facilities. But the problem with that is how they treat it. They aren't trying to really treat drug addiction. What they're doing is they're just switching out one bunch of bad drugs, fentanyl or meth and stuff, with a bunch of other bad drugs. So I have friends that have been captured, who their bad drug was marijuana. Because there's, I have one friend, she was in her 70s. She'd been smoking marijuana on the wharf when she was young in the 60s and blah, blah, blah. And she was just a nice person, but she was going blind, and the county wouldn't give her housing unless she agreed to take a like Prozac or something like that, right? And she didn't want to dull her senses with that. And she said, just give me housing. I'm capable human. And I had her living with me, for a while myself. So no, she's just a laid back woman that can't see very well. And so they put her in the mental health facility against her will for like 6 months. Did give her a place in Ben Lomond, but she hated being on whatever the psychiatric drug was so bad, she just went cold turkey and died of a heart attack within a couple of days. So she was out of the mental hospital for like less than a week before she dies from, just, no one told her, oh, cut down like a little bit. If they did, she didn't refuse to do it. And then she died. So I have other people that are I have homeless friends that never even used drugs, got captured and put in mental facilities. And my one friend, he got injected with the COVID vaccine against his will, got myocarditis while he's basically incarcerated in the mental health place, almost dies from that. And then now he's a ward of the county and is in a care unit. He was completely healthy, beautiful, wonderful man before that. He was weird, but you don't need to go to a mental hospital. He never hurt a soul in his life. He was like, he lost his entire drum collection, all of his crystals. He lost his website. He lost everything that he had. And just because he was peculiar, not because he did any criminal thing or did anything wrong or in any way deserved this. Now his life has been ruined, and this is going to happen in this Proposition 1 thing. So, but there's actually projects there are people that know how to, if you have a drug rehab centers, there's some successful programs, but they should be funded and expanded, but there's no profit in it. You're not getting, there's a lot of problems for the state in regard to that, and one of them is that you're going to lose money in the homeless industrial complex if suddenly everybody is like, okay. See, so when I started Food Not Bombs, you didn't run into tons of people on heroin and maybe cross stops or speed or something like that, but not meth. That wasn't around, publicly. That wasn't most of your in 1980 people that were living on the streets were largely alcoholics and like Korean War and World War II vets. It wasn't like, now. So, but the government needs all these people on drugs for a bunch of reasons, and one of them, and this I forget the new drug that's real popular now, where you mix
Fentanyl.
Well, no, fentanyl with the horse tranquilizer, so that Narcan can't even save you.
Oh,
and
yeah,
and we don't have a what's that? Starts with a T. Yeah, trans or something like that.
Trank.
Trank. Yeah,
they call it trank, but it's yeah, and that's the one where you see a bunch of people with rotting flesh, because it's like you said, it's for horses, and the human body can't handle it, so it literally starts to eat away at the muscles. So that's why you see people walking around with all these giant wounds on their legs and on their arms, because it's the trank. It's literally eating them alive. And
plus it puts them in this weird stupor, so you look like this, like you're we only have like one guy that seems to do it here, which is amazing. There's only one person, but he always stands
I've seen
and
a
walks.
few.
Yeah, there's not as many. It's horrible.
It's what I see all that. So I'm an avid runner. I'm a trail runner and like a distance runner. And one of my road running routes is I go and I park over at Ross. Ross, right next to,
right.
I'll park there and I'll run the levee all the way up to the boardwalk, and then I'll run down Westcliff to the Surf Museum, circle back, and right out in front of like Trader Joe's on the levee right there. It's insane. I mean, I run there so much that it's like I recognize the same people, and you can tell who the dealers are. They're always riding around on scooters. They still got a mask on to, cover their face, and nobody. It's
and the sad thing is that those people coordinate with the homeless, the city and county homeless people. The dealers are directly linked to employees of this some of the people kind of go from the city to the county to the city. So I know this it's very unfortunate, but they they know the three. They've even explained it to me in some senses, that the three Mexican gangs that they work with, when the benchlands was happening, the people running the benchlands from the city would, when they needed to get like some kind of like buy-in to something, they all of a sudden. I remember one day I'm like across the footbridge into the over where it goes across the river from Trader Joe's, and there must have been like 30-40 people with tinfoil and straws doing meth. I never seen that. The other
Right,
weird
and
thing.
what happened to the environmentalists? We have steel trout in that river, and
Yeah.
it's getting filled with fentanyl needles, foil, glass pipes, human feces, and to me, this is also an environmental issue, and people don't want to hear it. And the thing that sucks is I almost agree with the forced detox type programs, but it shouldn't be that they're put in some mental health facility where they're going to, shoot you up full of drugs, like a place where you can go. I proposed the idea when I was running for office of converting some wings in local jails into rehab facilities where people, after a certain amount of time, if you keep getting busted with drugs, you get put in this facility, but all you get is good food, good water. And if you go through this program where you actually get clean, it gets expunged from your record. And then you can have some sort of work program afterwards. But the problem is all of these programs will get hijacked by these bad actors that just want to work for big pharma and chock people full of drugs. And like you said, so I really don't know what the solution is.
Well, like I say in the last section of the Jimmy Dore, it's going to sadly be a revolution, because the problem is, sure. So this whole building of housing or housing first thing that is going on, which then so it just keeps going. It's like any kind of dual thing that the people in power run. So you're either a Republican or a Democrat. There's no other option. There's
Right.
either everyone is like a criminal and is like incarcerated, or everyone gets to go wild and do whatever they want,
Right.
and they don't. It's cheaper for the governments and it's more profitable for the governments is if you end up in these facilities. Like Newsom is going to, I guess, evacuate a bunch of San Quentin and put people, homeless people in that section of San Quentin and give them these psychiatric drugs and stuff. And that's one of their big plans, right? And they're going to build more and more prisons, and then you're going to be put into them with the billions of dollars that we're going to pay because of Proposition 1. And then
they're sequel to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah. And then you're just going to drug all these people. But the thing is that they're, it's so integrated into this system so that this is necessary. One of the reasons that we need to have homeless people is we need to be afraid as a low-income worker that we're going to be homeless if we don't do whatever the boss says. Don't complain about stuff. That's part of the message. The other message is to make sure we have as scary people visible as we can, because really about half the homeless people or more are basically low-income workers that can't find housing, that aren't on drugs, and they're just trying to survive. But they're not. There's also, because they're not on drugs, they're not visible because they're not on drugs, and they know how not to be visible, right?
Why doesn't Capitola have this problem nearly as bad as Santa Cruz?
Well, it's going to have it, unfortunately, because and it's already starting to happen a bit. But they don't have a homeless industrial complex there yet, right? See, there's no shelter or anything like that there. Janus is on the border, but they don't have, so they don't have any. But it is a lot of the people I know that I've been feeding at the town clock are now starting to hang out in Capitola. So and partially because the hiding spots are getting filled up by new homeless people, and they're getting sick of being ticketed and harassed in Santa Cruz. So they, I know Musical Mike, for instance. I don't think he ever really had much problems with cops, but he now lives in Capitola, and I have a lot of friends now that live outside in Capitola, but they're not visible because they're not using drugs, and that's, I think, part of it. But it's just it's such an unfortunate thing, because there are, so it all goes hand in hand with a series of things. For instance, go back to Iran-Contra actually plays a huge role in the current homeless crisis in a number of ways. So when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, he was running that Iran-Contra cocaine and guns operation out of Arkansas. And his wife, Hillary Clinton, gets on the board of Walmart. And on the board of Walmart, she convinces them and if you're not old enough to remember this, but all the Walmart trucks had a big American flag on the back that said, "Always made in America." And this, when Hillary got it on the board, she convinced them to start moving all the manufacturing for Walmart, mostly to China, but also to Mexico and to Vietnam and places like that. And that helped gut the jobs in the United States. Meanwhile, Clinton, her husband, does NAFTA after he finally becomes president, and he gets rid of Glass-Steagall. He starts changing, new crime bills, and now you've got like a crack epidemic happening that's being facilitated by the Central Intelligence Agency. Expanding the Bloods and the Crips and so on. Which was a tiny little like LA gangs that they then financed and supplied. So there became subsidiaries of the Bloods and Crips all over the country, getting people hooked on crack. Meanwhile, the politicians are all doing cocaine, not worrying about stuff. But all of these things are tied together. So eventually the country is being gutted out intentionally by these people financially, because there was not a lot of what people like to go, what? Maybe Reagan emptied the mental hospitals and that's why we have all this homeless. But that's actually not, that's a myth. John F. Kennedy emptied the mental health, all the mental health, the mental hospitals. But because of the politics of America, the states had power to either fund the halfway houses or not. And it was really the governor that didn't, fund the halfway houses that were supposed to be of this project. But that was also, remember, John F. Kennedy's a Democrat, and there's a whole NGO union structure there that's connected to the Democratic Party, and when they're allies of the Republican Party as well. There's really no difference, sadly. But so they don't ultimately do that, and then end up having many more visible homeless as a direct result by the time Reagan is president. And it's not Reagan's fault specifically. It's the system that already set that up through Carter and LBJ and all that. It's always moved along, and it's just like the current wars are continuation of the Biden wars, which are continuation of the last Trump administration wars, which is a continuation of the Clinton. There's a system here that just keeps going forward. And really the main difference between administrations and governments and how this is all happening is because of technological advances. So for now we have AI, so they feel like, this is my sense, is they got so much data that they think they can now do total digital social control of everybody. And that's why one of the things that's happening with all these smart cities, if your viewers don't know what that is, what Santa Cruz is doing is that you won't have they're going to make everything downtown pedestrian, right? Sounds so beautiful. I would like a pedestrian downtown. I don't mind that, but it's what it's behind. There's all these tall buildings that are being pitched as low-income housing, which are never affordable housing,
Right.
And all this green energy, this, that, and the other. So I was on the webinar with Town Clock Center development when it was going to be a 19-story building and run by Benchlands, and they explained why there's no parking. There's only one layer parking garages in the projects because you're going to be getting a zip car at the new parking garage where the farmers market is, and everything's going to be hooked up to the grid, and everybody will. And they were trying to sell this as a great thing, that every appliance in your apartment will be like integrated, and you could be anywhere and turn on your coffee maker, and it's all going to be wonderful. And then of course we're going to know exactly what your carbon footprint is, because that's going to be monitored, and everything will be monitored. And like Larry Ellison said in September before the election, he was the head of the CIA contractor Oracle, actually founded by the CIA, of course, just like Palantir, and all these. Our local town is the epicenter of fascism in this digital dystopian. So one of the things I know, I'm banned from Bookshop Santa Cruz for the third time, and boy, now they're real aggressive if I try to deliver a poster to their information area. The information table on Front Street on that side of the building. And that's because I found out that, well, I knew these things. I started putting them together. So the owner of Bookshop Santa Cruz, Casey Coonerty's brother, is Ryan Coonerty. He was the former on the board of supervisors with Friend. And Friend had been like a public relations officer at the Santa Cruz Police Department. Their relationship was vital in creating predictive policing software. I forget the name of the company they had.
Palantir?
No, not Palantir. Became Palantir. Their code became Palantir. It is Palantir now. But so then Casey's husband, Michelle Prati, at the time, he helped finance the predictive policing software of Ryan, and Casey was already married to Michelle Prati at the time, and they're still married, and they seem like a very nice couple. I met him, and she's not very nice, but he is very nice, but as a human. But his role in creating this predictive policing, funding it when he was a vice president of Yahoo, before he became the top person. According to Casey, he's above Mark Zuckerberg at Meta. And he's one of the highest ranking executives at charge of online safety as one of his projects. But he's also dealing with like the, trying to fend off regulations on, trying to, I don't know, some issues surrounding the federal government going after him for some reason. But his main thing is, according to the Meta website, is that he's the head of online safety. And as it turns out, he's the head. Not only is Meta integrated into Palantir, into predictive policing, the faces on Facebook, the images on Instagram, he's also at the core of censorship. So I guess today, or the last couple of days, his department deleted hundreds of Facebook and Instagram pages that were calling for the end of the genocide in Palestine.
I just saw several accounts that, like large accounts, that said that they're freaking Mr. You remember people behaving badly? You remember the show People Behaving Badly?
Right, yeah.
So his account got suspended on Facebook.
Yep. Yeah, I lost my account for the Anarchist Cookbook was mysteriously disappeared like a week ago, and so then the head of the top attorney of Google,
Stanley Roberts. Thanks, Danger.
The Prados, her husband has been trying to get that we got emails showing that he's talking to the city, trying to get my car towed, and she tried to tow the RV that the president of the homeless union was living in with her 3 little kids and her disabled husband, and she did a public records act request and found out why she was being ticketed several times a day. And these are millionaires; they're just out, she's not bothering anybody. She was parking in an industrial, next to an industrial yard on Delaware at the time. And it was just like cruelty, really. And here you got millions of dollars. You're the top attorney of Google and so on. And you're spending all your time trying to do that. And it's not, I'm not even clear why somebody in that person's perspective would spend, he's got money. Why didn't he go to the Bahamas or something? And, but that's what he spends his time doing, is having these meetings with the city to get rid of homeless people. But he's got millions, so he could actually they could fund a study on the most appropriate way to do addiction treatment, and then build these facilities and hire these people and then just do that. instead of like having, homeless people's RVs towed, making laws against living in RVs, things like that. It's insane.
Well, they don't want that. They don't
No.
want to. So there's a coordinated attack on the organizations like yours, Food Not Bombs, that actually wants to help homeless people, actually get people into rehab, and actually help homeless people. There's a coordinated effort to attack those organizations and then prop up these money laundering organizations that all they're there to do is perpetuate the homeless problem. Here's your needles. Here, you can go inject over here. We're not going to touch these drug dealers. We're going to let them operate with impunity. It's this, and to me, it's so transparently obvious. When you see it's like a three-pronged attack. We're going to allow you to shoot up on the streets. We're going to give you the tools required to shoot up on the streets. And we're going to allow the dealers to operate openly, and we're not going to bust them. It's like, how obvious did it have to be that they're trying to make this problem worse and they're profiting off of the despair of human beings? It's sick.
It's frightening. I remember when we were getting arrested in San Francisco at Golden Gate Park. We still served there after they were arresting us, but we realized that that you don't need permission to do this. Like, we were banned. It was kind of funny when we were like publicly banned from the clock tower and cut off from, and the city bragged about trying to cut off our sources of food and so on. It make the news that there was like a new law that we can't serve food there, the cease and desist order that would make it in the Sentinel and local media. And then like 5 months later, we're still there, and people would go, "I thought you guys were shut down. We read in the paper you were shut down," and it kind of backfires because it just shows like, yeah, screw them. We're just going to keep going. They're going to have to arrest us, right? So, and they if they arrest us, it'll ruin the city. So they're not going to, because that'll be tourism. Oh my God. Because the reality, people want the best for homeless people. And they would fund, we could take the $1 trillion in military spending that's proposed. And do something well with it. And it's not totally, the other thing that's really an interesting thing I find for years this has been the case. For every homeless person in California, there's something like 20 empty units. So if you got that part of the homeless community, which is really substantial, that just would like a living wage and could pay their rent because they had a living wage, and put them into these, and to guide people, like it could be like a statewide registry connected to all the real estate companies and stuff that said, okay, if this person, could, we'll help give them the first and last month's rent to get in because we see they got a stable job. And, you could have programs like that for the people that aren't on drugs. And then you could have real drug rehab stuff if you wanted. But nobody's going to do that because it doesn't help the people that are in power. They want, that's the problem.
Right. Well, the anarchist in you has to believe that there's no way the state is ever going to solve this problem. This has to be done privately somehow.
And that definitely the state's not going to do it, but it's also part of the problem is the state's in the way of private efforts like ours, or like, even if you had a lot of money, but then you look at like these things like the Sean Diddy Combs trial that's happening. You see a show trial, and it's only like because of my relationship with my mother's father and his connection to the intelligence community, you can see that there's probably, we're going to give you millions of dollars if you do this and cooperate with us. So even like people with money that might be willing to actually fund these operations and actually come up with solutions end up getting blocked because they'll figure out a way to go after anybody, even a millionaire or billionaire that's altruistic. You're unlikely in many cases to get to that point, of having that much influence if you haven't already been compromised in some way. And it doesn't mean that you've got sexually blackmailed necessarily, or something of that, financially blackmailed maybe, or whatever. Or, there's ways. they'll like go after one of your associates and use them as an example to make sure you don't step out of line, right? So we got this whole social control thing that's operating behind the scenes, and now with Palantir, which is it was funded by In-Q-Tel, which was created by U.S. Congress, and so it's a private. So this is another scary thing. The reason Palantir exists, and then people should Google Alex Karp and Palantir and check out the way he talks on these conferences. It's kind of
it's completely dystopian.
It is frightening. And so this is a funny thing. After 9/11, and I had a brief stint where I was working for a bookstore connected to the National Park Service, and there was they started Total Information Awareness, Poindexter, famous from Iran-Contra, that Iranian hostage crisis, and he's connected to that with Clinton and them. All these people are all in the, just like Carlin said, it's a big party, but you're not in it. But so then anyway, what ended up, so I called up, so I want to be part of information, to the TIPS program, Total Information Awareness, not because I really wanted to, but because I want to see how it worked. So I got invited to the founding meeting in Tucson, and it's at the mayor's house. And who's the head of Total Information Awareness is the wife of the head of international sales of Raytheon Missile Systems. And we had people there we had a guy that was his name was Mr. X, because he was so top secret that, and then Home Depot was going to give us like little flashlights and things, and we're going to have a lobster dinner at this place. We're all excited about that. And the big news of the day was Al-Qaeda was going to drive down the street with a machine gun shooting pedestrians. Well, there's only one pedestrian street in Tucson, Arizona called 4th Avenue, and all the people on drugs are on that street. So what they would be doing is shooting their very own enemies, essentially, if Al-Qaeda really was driving around with motorcycles with machine guns, which of course would never happen, but not in the United States. I mean, it would be, unless the FBI needs it, then they'd hire some Al-Qaeda to do it. But anyway, so fortunately that disappeared, because one of the aspects of that is the people delivering mail were supposed to be part of the spy network, and they got too much pushback from the employees of the post office, and so they privatized it, and they called it Palantir. And so many of the same people involved in Total Information Awareness just became the private company Palantir. So there can be like sketchy things with moving into the private sector as well, where it's not really exactly what one would hope, because here they get all their money from the government, right? Us. And then they spy on us, and they're a private company. So there's no, they can do whatever they want, which is what they are doing. And in fact, Alex Karp,
Palantir is just another NGO. And for the first 5 years of their existence, their only client was the CIA. And
correct, yeah.
Peter Thiel's relationship. So a lot of people
Peter Thiel's fun.
Yeah, that's another one. So a lot of people get mad at me because I do not trust Elon Musk. I mean, I appreciate with what he's done with Twitter in terms of opening up speech to say things, but I think there's nefarious purposes behind it. I mean, with all of the data aggregation that he's doing, if you had a way to track people's banking records, their location data, things they've said online, and throw that into Palantir's Gotham, that is the perfect way to create a pre-crime network. And then there's things like Zuckerberg stuff. So you remember LifeLog? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I stupidly did a little bit of that or something. I looked into it and I was like, oh my God.
Do you know what started the day after LifeLog ended? Because Congress was like, yeah, you guys can't be doing this shit. You guys are insane. Do you know what started after that? Literally the day after what was launched?
Was Facebook?
Facebook.
Yeah.
The day after LifeLog ended.
Yep.
Zuckerberg's a Fed, man. I swear, I think Zuckerberg's a Fed, and that's
he has to be. Well, he has. I mean, if not, the money behind Facebook was CIA, so
and Google,
and the money behind Google was CIA. Well, of course, the entire internet was CIA, basically. Or
I thought Al Gore invented the internet.
Yeah, right. So yeah, it's a perfect surveillance thing. Yeah, I mean, it's just part of the matrix. That's what the smart city will ultimately be in Santa Cruz and every place where they have these 15-minute smart cities.
And then if
it'll
you say
be
the wrong thing on the internet, they're going to turn off all your appliances using your real ID.
Correct. So yeah, and I do like Twitter or X or whatever it is now, but I have been, my original account was removed once.
What happened? Yeah, what the hell's going on? Your account I could still go to your account and I could still see it. Why are you locked out of it?
I have no idea. I can't get figured out how to get back in. It's so frustrating, and I'm terrified to get rid of the. So the one I'm using now that you and I communicated on here, which has almost no followers, whereas my other one has zillions of followers. I don't know what I have, I don't know, a lot relative to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm a little afraid to log out because I don't remember the password for the other one.
Oh, that's what it is? You're just locked out of it? You
Yeah.
forgot your password?
Well, no, this is what happened. So I've gone through this a couple of times. So one day, when what's his name? Jack Dorsey had X, Twitter, I got all of a sudden locked out of my account, but the one that you and I have been communicating popped up, the McHenry 6, Keith McHenry 6. So I had that, and it's like, wow.
Well, when you get locked out of your account, did they say that your account has been suspended due to you said the wrong thing? Do you get one of those messages?
I didn't when Dorsey was in. It just all of a sudden that account disappeared. I couldn't get back on it, but I had this other account, and I was just completely locked out of the original account.
You might have just, it might be going on. This might be a boomer problem, Keith.
It might be a boomer problem.
If you go, are you using it on your phone or on your desktop?
On my laptop, yeah.
So if it's really easy to accidentally log out, you're not even logging out. It's switching accounts. If they're both tied to the same email, if you just click on your at least from the app, you could just go to the other account on accident. And if you do it on your phone, both of your accounts will pop up. Like if you go to your own profile, it'll show your other account in the top right hand corner. And if you tap on that, it'll switch over to that account. And while you're in that account, if you go to your profile, it'll show your other account. And if you tap on that, it'll go back to the other one. So you're probably not even logged out. You probably just switched accounts on accident.
Maybe so. Yeah, I woke up one day and I had this new account. It's happened twice where all of a sudden I've got this other account and I can't. Yeah, so thanks for that, because that's great. Because now I won't fear getting out of. This account.
I wonder if I could even show you. So,
isn't that funny? But it's frustrating. It's weird because look at no computers when I started doing graphic design, and not for graphic design. There were no laptops. There were no desktops, or if there was, it was like I don't even know what that company was at the time. They're probably gone. But anyway, so here I've gone through. I ended up being a digital finisher at Hallmark Cards, where I'm just doing Quark and oh god, I can't even remember what that program was. A vector program and stuff to make cards. I made 2 cards in like half a year. There were restrictions. It was crazy, but anyway, it was interesting. So here I should be more adept at technology because I've been in it forever. But I am a boomer. It is a boomer problem. But it is weird that it just like got switched. Yeah. But definitely I spent a lot of energy trying to find out where my Facebook page for my book went. It's definitely just gone. It's completely disappeared. Other people tried to search for it themselves. You can't find it anywhere.
That probably did get nuked.
Yeah. And it's a possibility. I think my original Jack Dorsey account that I have now was like censorship because, I was not in support of the Democratic Party, definitely. I think the last time before this current problem I'm having on X is because I definitely was. It took me like about 3 months to get back on X, and it was a concerted effort. And I kept writing them and going through the whole system and stuff. And then one day it popped back up. I could get on, and that I believe in that time was definitely support of Palestine because I was very aggressively in support of Palestine, you know, and because I've been in Palestine, and it's so. I mean, maybe if I hadn't been in Palestine, I'd still be traumatized by these images of a genocide. Just even if I heard about a genocide without seeing the images, it'd be horrific. And so, you know, I you know, like, yeah, I have like a meme that I have is like Keith McHenry, co-founder of Food Not Bombs. I support the blockade of the Red Sea. that could be have contributed the first time I was popped off of that, because I do know there's like some sensitivity on Palestinian issues on X. But I do. Here's back to you know, to Michelle Prati and Bookstore Santa Cruz and Ryan Coonerty and that whole trip. One of the other things that's terrible about the censorship by Michelle Prati at Meta was all the COVID information that was deleted off of Instagram and Facebook. And now we see even mainstream media in the last week has started showing that what we were saying at the beginning of the pandemic, that there hadn't, you know, the vaccines and so on what could potentially be dangerous. Fortunately, one of my best friends, one of the Baltimore Food Not Bombs people from back in the day, was also intentionally worked for the NIH on Moderna vaccines because she wanted to alert people to. She became a microbiologist because we were protesting at Fort Detrick in Maryland against gain of function, because we've been organizing against gain of function research now since the 90s.
We are not doing gain of function research.
Yeah, right. So when COVID happened, she changed all her profiles and everything and changed her name and on the digital frontier, and came to visit me and said, whatever you do, don't take that. But I was already could smell a rat because NPR had, you know, that's the end of me ever listening to NPR. I knew it was all lies, but I thought, well, I can figure out what the state's doing to, you know, attack whoever because that's the, you know, it's the public voice of the deep state, right? And so
everything that you would have gotten suspended for to say that you said about COVID while it was going on, everything that you would have gotten suspended for has been proven true. The lab leak theory, masks, ivermectin, the vaccine is not going to stop transmission. Like, that was such a, you would get suspended for saying the vaccine is not going to stop transmission. Fast forward 6 months and they're all saying, oh, we never said it was going to stop transmission. It's only meant to protect others. And it's like, well, how's it meant to protect others if it doesn't stop transmission? It's like, oh, well, wait, no, never mind. It's only meant to make it so you won't get that sick. Like, the whole thing. And now everybody's memory holding it. You know, 85% of Californians took the shot, at least one of them,
right?
Oh my
God, that's horrible. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but so now everybody that got duped into taking the shot or coerced into taking the shot has this massive cognitive dissonance thing going on because they don't want to look back at, many people don't want to look back at how horribly they behaved, and other people don't want to admit that they were conned into taking a shot that they didn't want to take. And I work with like 3 or 4 different people that didn't take the shot and they stood their ground and they didn't do it. I even know a nurse. Bunny, hi, how are you? Hope you're watching. She works for, well, I don't want to say the hospital she works for, but she didn't take the shot. She just kept standing her ground. And the vast majority of people that did that didn't get fired because they knew that there's that, like, opens them up to a massive lawsuit. And it's just the memory holding of all of that is extremely freaking frustrating. So
it is. It's really interesting. So my girlfriend, like I said, works as a medical social worker in local hospitals, and she refused to take the shot. And, you know, she's still employed at a local hospital. But she was the thing that really outraged her was mandatory COVID vaccines for children. So she ended up, at first, there used to be, it's weird how like you say, it's memory hold, because there's a bunch of so at first I didn't know any other left-wingers were against the vaccine, right? I thought me and my girlfriend were it. And then, oddly enough, I watched a podcast of Convo Couch with Farilla and Pasta, and they were the first left wingers that was like, have the same position. It's like the military. It's a military, it's called Operation Warp Speed. And, it's like, it's coercion. And so my girlfriend, because then we start hanging out with, like, we find some people like that also are not getting, some of whom were left like us, and other people that were not, that were Republicans, that were libertarians, that were not getting the shot, and they weren't going along with it. So we started hanging out with them. But then, so in Santa Cruz, I was in a movie called, what was it called? Something Foodie. And so 1/3 of the movie was about food not bombs cooking at this local restaurant. And I wanted to go see it. It was at the Del Mar downtown. And you had to show either a negative COVID test in the last 24 hours. Mm-hmm. What a fucking pain in the ass that would be if that was even a thing to do. Or a proof of vaccination to see the movie at the Del Mar. But the Del Mar didn't make you do that. It was just the people that did this movie did that. So I never saw that movie. And 12 months later, they still had the same policy. It was incredible. And then my favorite cafe, they suddenly said, oh, yeah, you have to have proof of vaccination. Never went back there again, right? Then I have a friend that was running for mayor of Santa Cruz. And I'll go to, I happen to see it. I am often published in this blog called Surf City Times, like that we're serfs, like poor people. And so anyway, I see the ad for her mayor's launch party, and they go, oh, wow, I've got I'm going to take my essay, make it into a flyer, and go and talk to him. And it was called City Officials Puzzled by Reality was the name of my essay. City officials puzzled by reality, because what they're doing, they're kicking people out, and then they come back, and they couldn't figure out why they kept coming back, just because you kick them out of one, they need to be somewhere. But anyway, so I go there, and I'm walking in because I see this other friend of mine at the far end of the room. This is in a city building, and I'm like, about to say hi, and some woman goes, oh, you got your COVID vaccine card? And I'm like, what? No. And I said, no, I never got vaccinated. Why would I need that? And she starts grabbing me and pulling me out of the room. Get out of here, get out of here. And then this other guy they grabbed my hat off my head, tried to throw me on the ground. Then another woman was able to throw me on the ground. And then I called the police. I was like, this is crazy. They're beating me up in the middle of a city building when I'm, this is outrageous. And I just want to put the fear in them, because, they need to get cops to talk to them. Well, they wanted to look at my flyer because, of course, they sent people out to meet the cops before I got out of there. And they're like, they're thinking I'm handing out anti-vaxxer flyers. The cops are looking at my flyer going, I thought this was an anti-vaxxer flyer. This is about the city government and the homeless. So anyway,
people and they should have pressed charges.
Yeah, it's crazy. The whole thing is crazy. So I wrote, I ended up, I had to write I wrote a essay, which I forget the name of that one, but I used that image. There was, right when this was all happening, there was a cartoon where it was a VW bus from the 60s with peace symbols and question authority and stuff on it. And then there's the new VW bus that said obey and stuff on it. That's the image on that. But then I ended up getting interviewed by this man in France named Paul, and I forget his last name. But he has a really great blog. He's an anarchist. He's got an anarchist blog called Winter Oak, and he interviewed my email, and I was so moved by his questions and everything. I might have spent like 4 days ultimately answering all his questions, and it got it went everywhere. It was insane, and I had people calling me crying. I had like an anarchist who did food not bombs in Utah, and he cried, said he was so alone. And he was so appreciative that I think the name of that interview was I'm done with the left-right divide. It's the humans versus the robots, something of that nature. I mean, and that's where we're at.
Well, the whole thing with the so-called anarchists too, which I think is the modern day anarchists that you see that are, all dressed in black, covering their faces, they called themselves anarchists, and like the masses, the ones that would go and break windows and do all that crazy shit during the George Floyd riots, but they were so pro mandatory vaccination. It's like,
Yeah.
how are you calling yourself an anarchist in any way, shape, or form? It was infuriating. And I mean, yeah, I had my own horrible experiences with.
Oh, we all do, man. Yeah. So my girlfriend, she was so upset about all this. She started a group called Brave and Free Santa Cruz. And at first it was a really good mixture of left and Republicans and libertarians, no Democrats. Boy, did we get smeared by the liberal Democrats and by Democratic Socialists of America, and we were banned. I'm still banned from renting the Resource Center for Nonviolence because we were called like far right wing terrorist, homophobe, transphobe, blah 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 blahs. Right? There's an entire X account that's supposed to be the Santa Cruz Food Not Bombs X account that is nothing about how horrible I am because I refuse to get vaccinated and I'm a transphobe, blah 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 blah, right? And yet I like the trans rally is going to happen again. I think this either Saturday or Sunday. We work with them every year at the town clock because they need that space for their event. We move to the post office. The woman that's the main woman running it is such a dear person. And so I'm hanging with like the trans community of Santa Cruz being trashed by the liberal Democrats for being for being transphobic. It's insanity, and it's the psychops of all this is insane. But so Brave and Free is actually going to have its next meeting. The focus of this meeting is not on. So we were originally really tight on organizing against the mandates. We're involved in a lawsuit, against mandatory vaccination, COVID vaccination, and other vaccinations for at-risk kids or for kids with special needs and so on. So we've been involved in, Brave and Free has been involved in that primarily. My girlfriend's been focused on that, but and then in Food Not Bombs is very fascinating. The people that about half of the local chapter never got vaccinated. Half the chapter did. The half that did had to call in sick a bunch of times for COVID. None of the half that had never got vaccinated has ever yet called in sick. And then I know people probably died of COVID or some related thing with the, Remdesivir or whatever it is, or the Remdesivir, yeah, all that stuff. But I don't know any people personally who their families told me their family member died of COVID. But but I do have one friend who died less than 24 hours after his second injection. And then I have another friend. I have 6 friends that have died directly from the COVID shot. But no friends, and I'm permanently disabled. So then when you get back to the anarchist thing, so I have this anarchist friend. I've known her for years. She's now confined to a wheelchair. She's in a care house. She's so upset about how, she's got stroke, half her body is paralyzed. I sent her like information, message her on Facebook, information on how to detox from COVID shots and stuff. She never responded to that, but she has on her Facebook page, I question authority, but I'm vaccinated, right? And there's a bunch of my anarchist friends had that. I even made my own version to spoof them, because it just so infuriating. And then the anarchist book fair, I stopped going to it because it's a mandatory mask at the anarchist book fair.
Still?
Yeah, still this year, people, and then I was supposed to speak in at Waltham Food Not Bombs in Boston, and they were gonna, and I bought a plane ticket and stuff like that and was ready to go, and then somebody came to the local meeting and said, Keith is a far right wing anti-vaxxer, you can't come here, and so I got canceled from speaking there. And my Wikipedia page, of course, they put in how I'm a right-wing anti-vaxxer, and so it's really crazy. But thank goodness, so we're going to meet at the Aptos Grange on Mar Vista in Aptos Tuesday at 6, and this one is going to be subject on the war, because we're edging towards potential war against Iran.
Waiting for that false flag. Waiting for that to pop off.
And the shooting at the embassy party or whatever it was in that's a whole sketchy, maybe false flag type thing.
Maybe, yeah. And I don't want to jump to any speculation on that yet, just because it's so soon and early. But there's definitely some weird things going on with it, like the dude that picked up the dude's Kaifa or Kifa or whatever it's called, and he's like, "Here, don't forget this." It's like, make sure you get this in the picture.
I know, and nothing's going on. Then finally, he gets handcuffed and he starts saying "Free, free Palestine" and that, and then he's in this sectarian group in Chicago. But that's so the group he allegedly was a part of, this communist group, is it's connected to the groups doing the large Palestinian, and I could go into a lot of their kind of the backgrounds of these sectarian groups because I've always been around them. I know the founders of many of them and stuff because I've been doing this now for 50 years. But I don't agree with a lot of their stuff, but I'm against the genocide, and they're organizing protests, and I've had problems with them organizing protests because they're centralized and it's easy for them to do. And then when there's like more grassroots groups like ourselves, like I've never been on the stage of a large peace rally in the United States ever, except for about 10 minutes once in Tampa, Florida during the Republican National Convention, because they ran out of speakers and they went in the audience and got me to speak. But I'm never, because Food Not Bombs is my sense, you think you'd have me on some stage someday, somewhere, but I know everybody organizing all these things. But
my problem with them is like I agree with the cause. Like I am also, I'm not going to go out and chant Free Palestine and all that kind of stuff. But these are the same people, for the most part, that were doing the George Floyd protests and doing the pro-vaccine crap during COVID. And there was one protest at a campus where Norman Finkelstein goes up on stage and starts talking. And he starts talking about certain sympathies that he has for, actually, I can't even remember exactly what but you know Norman Finkelstein, right?
Yeah, for sure. I've been following him for decades.
Anarchist, leftist, and they shouted him down. And it's like, you guys have lost it. Like this is why I can't be on board with because I don't even think they are pro-Palestine. Like, I think that they're just going out there, they're being handed a freaking sign. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know any of the history of the creation of Israel or the creation of Zionism, or they're just out there and like, this is the team I'm on, so this is what I'm doing type thing. And that's why it's super frustrating. But this whole issue, it's funny because the COVID vaccine stuff and the Israel-Palestine stuff are sort of bridging a gap between the left and the right. Because
I think so, yeah.
Like, this is why Jimmy Dore has such a big audience that are like MAGA, is because people paint it as like all MAGA is super pro-Israel. That is the farthest from the truth. The majority of, and it's not even being anti-Israel per se. I mean, that could be debated, but it's not like people. It's painted as this whole hating Jews thing, and like anybody that says, "Hey, I don't want kids being starved to death. I don't want kids being blown to smithereens. This is horrible what's happening, and we need to find a solution." Oh, you're anti-Semitic, and it's like, no, I'm anti-war. Like, how did like, and it's the same. They're using the same exact tactics as if the people that are anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion shit with the equity right there in the center. where it's like, no, we're a merit-based society. It's like, if you're black and you get the job, great. If you got it on your merit, that's wonderful. But having a quota that you have to meet, this amount of men, this amount of women, this amount of black people, this amount of trans people, like that's ridiculous. Oh, you're racist. Oh, you're sexist. Oh, you're homophobic. It's the exact same strategy that they're using for people that criticize Israel right now. And it's so transparent. And it's
well, yeah, it's well, you know,
you got a fan. Northside just said, "Fuck yeah, Keith McHenry."
That's so beautiful. So what's it? You know, the ADL. I was in the Pinkos file for the ADL in San Francisco, and so what the ADL spied infiltrated food on bombs. You know, as you would imagine, and there's the Roy Bullock, Tom Gerard spy scandal. The only people that ever, you know, kind of push that, you know, like if you Google Roy Bullock, you know, Tom Gerard spy scandal, you'll find it's always conservative people that are, you know, blogs and things like that, or whatever, you know, newspapers from back in the day. They didn't have blogs probably, that reported on it. And it's a really interesting case. And I found out about it when I was in the elevator in the federal building on Golden Gate Avenue in San Francisco, when I was coming down with my lawyers, with these other lawyers, and they say, "Oh man, you got to check out the 750 pages we got from the Tom Gerard Roy Bullock spy scandal." So how they got the papers is that there was actually a state assembly person with a Palestinian American, and he had some resources, and he kept wondering why when he went to register his vehicle, that he'd have thousands of dollars worth of parking tickets. And then he would have to pay them off, or, you know, because he had money, he'd pay them off. But he thought, what's going on? And I had that same problem. I'd register my truck in March, but I'd have $5,000 worth of parking tickets that I had no idea where they came from. And it turned out what was happening is this former CIA interrogator who tortured people in El Salvador during the Civil War. And my girlfriend, who started Brave and Free Santa Cruz, was in the Civil War as a human rights activist for 6.5 years. And she saw the craziest stuff. And, you know, and I was over here organizing in Boston, organizing against that Civil War. But anyway, you know, it turns out what he's doing is he had a houseboat in Sausalito. I don't know why that's important, but that's how they reported it. And he would like input, you know, they would just give you a bunch of tickets remotely by computer to all the enemies of the state of California, so that then you would be messed up when it came time to register your vehicles. And so I had a traffic accidents where there was no victim address or location or anything about it, but I had them on my record. And it was basically Tom Gerard, who was a San Francisco police intelligence officer at the time he's doing this, but that was his job, was to input, you know, like parking tickets for, you know, for enemies of the state, so that they would have to either pay a lot of money. I had my own scam to get out of it, but and I would get $200 worth of parking tickets driving from parking in traffic down by 850 Bryant Street to the Fell Street out in the Panhandle, and as long as it took me to drive from there with my affidavit showing I'd completed all my tickets, my community service, and was totally, you know, should be able to register my vehicle, I get to DMV, I had $250 worth of more parking tickets. And that would happen.
Yeah, you got targeted for sure.
Yep. So this kind of stuff happened. So then Roy Bullock was his sidekick. Roy Bullock was an antique dealer. A lot of cops are antique dealers. It should be pointed out. That's a great thing for, like the police in San Francisco were handing out crack cocaine at the corner of Haight and Stanton. And then they were telling the people that were doing breaking and enterings they could get full price if they went to this antique store, and then they finally bust the operation because they are the operation, and they get more money because they got to stop burglaries in the Haight-Ashbury. You know, it's the same thing. So,
do you remember the free clinic in the Haight-Ashbury?
Yeah, I do remember the free clinic. Yeah.
Tom O'Neill wrote about that in his book Chaos. And
yeah, that's a benefit of that. Yeah.
Well, what's hilarious is it was still in operation, and his book Chaos comes out. They shut that shit down 2 weeks after the book came out.
Oh, I didn't know that, because I remember it as CIA
op.
Yep. And we used to say that every third person standing on Haight Street was a spook of some sort. Every third person, all the way from
Operation Midnight Climax.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even in the 80s, I mean, because the cops would have people selling crack at Haight and Stanton during the Food Not Bombs meal. And you would see the plainclothes cop would like have a white baggie and run up to somebody in the line and stick it in their pocket and then throw them on the ground and arrest them. But the the whole it's psychotic. But yeah, this is
Scarlet.
You got a good puppy. Somebody's delivering mail or something.
No, the German Shepherd's outside across the creek, and she likes him.
Beautiful.
But so like how you're mentioning how like leftists, Food Not Bombs, all these different organizations on the left throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s were all targeted in these ways that you're talking about: traffic tickets, petty things, sending undercovers to go to events to do bad things that would reflect poorly on that organization. Well, now the same thing. Like I don't know how you feel about the January 6th stuff, but that was a freaking setup. Like all of it.
It was yeah. So my girlfriend. We're both as far left as you could be, if not sectarian. We're not in like a Marxist-Leninist group or anything. We're, I'm anarchist. I don't even know what her politics would be called, but it's like mine. And that's our tradition. I mean, she comes from the Catholic worker movement and so on like that. So,
well, your Wikipedia says you're a far-right anti-vaxxer, Keith.
That's right. So we're watching it on CNN. That's my dad's birthday. So anyway, we're watching the January 6th thing, and the whole time we're going, this is a psychops. And the reason it was so obvious while it was happening, we're saying this is an FBI, CIA, military intelligence psychops, because I have organized dozens of protests at the Capitol building. In fact, it turned out I had a bunch of friends organize a protest 3 days before at exactly the same part of the mall to free Julian Assange. And they had at least 2 riot police for every protester at that event. And they
probably know my friend Juliet.
And I know Julia. I know a bunch of the G6ers that made it in there that live here.
Well, no,
but,
she's a free Assange person out in Boulder Creek.
Oh, I don't know if I've met her, unfortunately. But Brave and Free, maybe she came to one of our. So Brave and Free was trying to lead the campaign in Santa Cruz for Julian Assange. So it's a possibility she came and I just didn't know who she was. But maybe I met her through Steve.
Steve.
Yeah, Wake Up. No, Steve, the podcaster who was living in Boulder Creek back in those days, but I don't know where he lives anymore. I'm often, Wake Up AM. It's like an anarchist.
There's a bunch of people I want to ask you if you know, like Kristen Hurley from Mama Bear Radio.
I know of Mama Bear Radio, but I don't know.
Kristen Hurley is the host.
The host, I don't know the host. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it's so funny. So, yeah, we just assumed right away that was like a psychops. And then my friend Steve, who I'm mentioning from Boulder Creek, he was there at that thing. There was a bunch of people I knew. Misty, who does well, right now she's on Do Dissidents. It's her she's got a podcast on there. Winsty, what's her last name? She's a really wonderful woman.
The Do Dissidents guys are the guys that fill in for Jimmy Dore when he's gone, right?
Correct, right. And then they've been doing a lot of great work also. And so anyway, they're all like they're filming afterwards, because they say, why don't we wait for go film this steal the vote protest. So they're there filming and stuff, and they're going that when they get back and I'm talking to them, they go, that was a freaking psychops, man. That was so crazy and it was so obvious. It's like so obvious. It's like, but they use that for a long time. They're going to probably use it again, And then the local media was they were going to have some of the, I have 2 really close friends that went to the Stop the Steal vote or whatever the thing it was, who were really into it, and they're such wonderful people, and they're Republican, and they want Trump to be the president and all that, and they still want Trump to, I think at least one of them really wants Trump. She keeps feeling that Trump's going to ultimately end all these wars. I don't really get that sense, but she's, to malign these people for their opinion is outrageous.
Well, right. So actually, I even said this on my last podcast, talking about how I was going to have you on, is like, you and I probably disagree on all sorts of approaches towards solving problems, but
right.
I guarantee we agree in identifying the problems. We might just disagree about how to fix those problems. And that to me encompasses the whole left-right divide. Is both the people on the right and the people on the left recognize that we have a military-industrial complex problem. We have a homeless industrial complex problem. The government's too big. The intelligence agencies have too much power and there's too much surveillance going on. But then it's just, how do we solve those problems is where we differ. But because you're on team left and I'm on team right, we can't have a conversation, or else you're, fraternizing with the enemy type thing. And that's the whole psyop right there, is this wedge that's been driven in between the left and the right. And like, I was raised by a deadhead, my dad was a bootleg recorder for Grateful Dead concerts, but he also wasn't like a far leftist, and
right.
But so I was raised in like a very libertarian household, but then COVID happens and it's like, holy shit, I'm a far right wing conspiracy theorist now all of a sudden. And it's like, no, I've just like read some books and recognized some patterns, and you sound like a kook when you talk about stuff right now. It's the whole
I had to give up on caring if I sound like a kook. So screw that. Because the reality is I stayed faithful to what I'd been doing for 50 years. I didn't change. I was against Pfizer, Moderna. I was involved in Ron Cummings, who was a co-author of The Truth Behind COVID-19, that very first book that came out. When I don't know who co-wrote that with him. Was it Kennedy? I don't know who wrote it. But anyway, he was an old left activist, and he wrote this he and his co-author, which I wish I could remember his name, might be, I think Kennedy was busy on another book. But anyway, he was part of Millions Against Monsanto. Right. He and Vandana Shiva and myself, we'd been working against that, for years, So we were already on this path. We were already organizing protests. My best friend, who sadly died a bunch of years ago, but he and I and his girlfriend, who became a virologist and worked on the Moderna vaccine, we'd been focused on the military, like using chemical warfare, biological warfare, nuclear warfare, mind control. My best friend is sadly in prison because he was in Food Not Bombs, and he's been smeared horribly, and probably got life in prison. But I keep working to try to get him out. But it's very difficult because of how the feds put that thing together. And oddly enough, his mom was the assistant to I just spaced out his name. The guy that's the most, Cameron, who did MK Ultra in Montreal, and his father was Cameron's assistant. So they were the ones that did the MK Ultra on Chapman, that went and shot and killed John Lennon, right? So he escaped all that because he was like horrified by what was going on. So as soon as he was 18, he was out of there, but he he lived in London with his family when they were doing MK Ultra there. Then you have, of course, a famous MK Ultra person was the Unabomber, and there was a while there where we didn't know who was going to be accused of being the Unabomber. I thought I might be the Unabomber, because you don't know if something's going along that long, you wonder if the government's going to say, oh, now it's time to get rid of this guy, we're going to call him the Unabomber. You don't know, because it was supposed to be an anarchist, blah, 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 right? I could have been me.
I've only done a handful of like deep dive episodes. I don't usually have a lot of guests, and I usually just cover like current topics, but I did one deep dive episode and I called it MK Uncle Ted. And that was yeah, that was definitely one. But then it makes you think about, most people haven't heard of MK Ultra though. Like, yes,
Yep.
people in our circles, the conspiracy theorists or whatever you want to call them, yeah, of course they've all heard of it, but most people haven't heard of MK Ultra. And then you look at the first Trump assassination attempt with
and
Cruz.
the person's gone. Yeah,
gone. They scrubbed his house. There was no silverware. He was in a freaking BlackRock commercial. Like,
yeah.
what the hell? He flew a drone around before the rally for hours. The only Trump rally that CNN covered was the one in Butler, Pennsylvania. How the hell did he get on the roof right outside where the freaking FBI was stationed? And then they say, oh, we didn't have anybody up there because the roof was sloped. Like,
Yeah.
that whole thing. And then same thing, just memory hold, and it's,
there's a lot of those. I remember when not long after 9/11, people would like kind of jack me up because I wasn't going along with the program. And boy, that was the 9/11 was the COVID of its time, right? You had to go with, it was like, like Iraqi terrorists, from Saudi Arabia, blah, 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 right?
So I was a freshman in college, and every paper that I had to write for 2 years straight was like, what is patriotism? What does liberty mean to you? Even though that's a paper I'd like to write today. What does liberty mean to me? But I remember, like, I didn't know anything back then. I was a baseball player. I didn't, and an English major. I didn't pay any attention to politics or anything like that. But I remember learning, like, we're going to go to war with Iraq. This is a couple years later. And I'm like, I asked two different professors. I was like, so, like, why are we going to Iraq? I asked them the same question. Why are we going to war with Iraq? Did they have anything to do with 9/11? First guy says, no, they had nothing to do with 9/11. They're saying they have weapons of mass destruction. He said it all like that. I asked another teacher, I asked another professor, and this is back, I'm so naive. I'm thinking like, oh, everybody's going to have the same consensus on this. So one of these teachers, one of these professors that are clearly so much smarter than me are going to be able to tell me. So the first guy says, no, he had nothing to do with Osama bin Laden, nothing to do with 9/11. And then the next guy asks, he's like, oh, well, yeah, he probably did. And they got weapons of mass destruction. So he was full bought in on the war thing. And then that's when the Dixie Chicks got canceled. And that was 9/11 was my first, like, and it was actually a couple of years after 9/11 that I started asking questions, but, just asking questions like Ben Shapiro doesn't want you to do. But that was 9/11 for me, and a lot of people my age, was the first, like, wait a minute, what's really going on here? Shit. And then that documentary Loose Change came out. Which had it had a lot of things wrong with it, but that really, like, opened the floodgates. And that's back when YouTube was the Wild West, and you could say whatever you wanted on YouTube. And Alex Jones was going freaking wild back then. And I was so naive back then. This is before Trump. So I was so naive back then that I watched both InfoWars and the Young Turks religiously. And this is back when Jimmy Dore was on the show, when Dave Rubin was on the show. And I watched both of them religiously. And then I remember at the Democratic National Convention, the Young Turks had their whole panel set up, and Alex Jones crashes their panel. And like, they get into this big giant feud. And I was like, it was weird for me because I was like, wait a minute, they're not friends?
That's so funny.
Because I didn't understand the difference between the left and the right back then. They both just said things that I agreed with,
Right.
And so that was sort of
you remember at the beginning, there was maybe 2 years ago, there was going to be this big protest, Stop the War Machine or something protest in DC. And it was against the, so there was like libertarians and conservatives and leftists. So we're going to have this giant march. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm into that. And then all of a sudden, oh no, this is, for some reason, it's so funny because it was Jackson Hinkle. They said, oh, he's involved, so no one can be at this event because he's a transphobe or something. I had no idea what the trip was about him that was so objectionable. He's just a young guy that did a podcast and was against war, And
well, he's a outspoken communist. But
Yeah, but he's not pushing his tendency or whatever. He's just
he's
there's a
really
lot.
not. Like that is
No,
the thing.
not at
He
all.
really
Yeah.
doesn't push communism too hard on Americans. He's just very outspoken about Israel, Gaza.
Right. Or whatever,
There
or the
is-
Ukrainian war for a while when he was doing that, right? And that kind of makes you, that's the other thing, like, it's just crazy. So they became this, the person that originally invited me to participate in that was Medea Benjamin. She's been a friend of mine for years. And then she said, don't bother coming. And it turns out that it wasn't her, but the people in Code Pink pressured her not to go because of Jackson Hinkle being the wrong thing. So that cancel culture just has kept happening, and I'm sure it'll keep happening. And here we should have all been united there against the war, but that was the important thing, to divide us. So you didn't have left and right all united against the war. Then for the last 2 years of the Biden administration, maybe 2.5 years of the Biden administration, I started getting phone calls like Monday through Friday, between 10 and 20 calls a day from seniors looking for food, telling me they had no food. And what was happening is in Obamacare, which is like a nightmare, they would have to have Part B or Part whatever it is. I was supposed to do it. I didn't do it. I ended up getting screwed because I didn't pay attention to that stuff. I was busy with a life. But anyway, then I had to rectify it. That was a pain in the ass, and I just did. But anyway, what would happen is they would see ads and they would go to United Health or they'd go to Humana or Kaiser, and they would get a card, if $100 card, if they signed up for their, Part B, whatever it was. And their assumption was, because they were retired on Social Security, and that's why they qualified, that they were going to get this $100 every month. So then it would run out of money, and they would call the number on the back, and then they would give them my number for home delivery of food. So I was getting, like I say, about sometimes as many as 20 calls a day from people just freaking out that they didn't have any food and they didn't know where they were going to get food, and a lot of them were disabled and couldn't get out. They'd tell me, I can't leave the house. Can you drive over here with some food? And many of them would say, this is outrageous that we're having this much trouble getting food, but we got tons of money to fight the Russians in Ukraine. This is crazy. And I couldn't believe how, and they must have been, I don't know if they were watching Fox TV and that's where they were getting the idea from, but it's the Americans didn't really want their money. The people I was talking to every day seeking help, they didn't want their money going to war. They thought it should be, I remember this one guy who was like 75 years old and on the Rio Grande River in Texas, almost to McAllen. And he was like, all the food pantries were out of food because there was so much pressure on the border for food that they had to shut down, because you had, all kinds of undocumented, I'm sympathetic to undocumented workers, but, it's the same thing where you have the NGOs that are funneling undocumented workers into the social service systems in local communities and freaking them out so that it's not even able to help anybody. And that's what happened with this poor guy, but he didn't mention that. He didn't say anything about why all the pantries had closed, but I assume that's why they closed. He said, I worked my whole life. I paid my taxes faithfully my whole life. And now I have got stage 4 cancer. My wife needs, is diabetic. We have to cut her insulin by half each month because we don't have the money. Now we have no food. We're about to lose our electricity. It's 110 degrees. I may not make it by the end of we may die. That shouldn't be in America. And he was a veteran, and the veterans benefits wasn't enough to help his thing out. God. And I'd hear these stories. I heard a woman, she just got off the streets. She finally has a house, but she has no gas for her car. She lives in rural Tennessee. Can I bring her some food? Why are they spending money on the war? This, it's like intentional chaos, that you got like we're in Santa Cruz. We're the richest people in the world here. Why do we have any worries, you know? But it's because of the political and economic system is all bent on social control, domination, and profits of the small, you know, like tiny percentage of people. But you know, the thing is that as a leftist, I am really disgusted with the Democratic Party, and it's super frustrating. Like, for instance, I would go out and be against Peter Thiel and digital fascism and everything that's being forced on the public right now. That's going to escalate dramatically. But the Democrats run these indivisible 50-51 protests and wave their Ukrainian flags. And I'm like, I'm against the Nazis. We had Food Not Bombs was in Ukraine, right? We were there. We were in Belarus. We're in Poland big time. We're in Russia, right? The Food Not Bombs kids in Russia did get arrested the first week of the special military operation protesting the war. And I'm supporting them being against the war. I'm against the war too. And then we had fights in the world Food Not Bombs because some people wanted to really support NATO because Putin is Hitler. And it's like, do you really need a nuclear war because Putin might be Hitler when Hitler, you know, Putin is really like, he was in the World Economic Forum before the special military operation, right? They were using facial recognition on the metro subway in Moscow to deduct money from your account to pay the fare. They had that going before, you know, the digital AI warfare is like a unified global assault on us, you know.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. So if you were against the Ukraine war, you were a Putin puppet. If you're speaking out against Israel now, you're funded by Qatar. One's a leftist approach, one's a right-wing approach in terms of canceling the people speaking out against war. And it's funny because you have all these people that are former leftists, like James Lindsay. I don't know if you know who James Lindsay is. He's the one that coined the phrase "the woke right." I don't know if you've heard this phrase.
I've heard the woke right. Yeah.
So the woke right is, nobody can define it. You ask tons of people that have heard of the woke right, but they are like, "What is the woke right?" Nobody can clearly define it. James Lindsay's tried to do this big abstract roundabout way of explaining it on Konstantin Kissin's podcast with Jordan Peterson. All it really comes down to is if you're on the right and you're critical of Israel, you're woke right. And they're saying it's funny because to me, the woke people are the ones trying to cancel people because they have the wrong opinions. And that's exactly what they're doing with labeling people the woke right. It's the ultimate projection. It's the exactly accuse them of what you're guilty of technique.
Exactly. Well, one of the coolest weirdnesses of now is and I agree. I mean, I've never been enthusiastic about Elon Musk, but it's really a funny thing. So I had all these liberal friends who had their Teslas, right? And they're very proud of having the electric car, and it's a status symbol and everything. And then Elon Musk is doing Doge, which is really basically like digitizing the analog aspects of things that you could make money off of out of the federal government. Basically, seemed like what that was about, because they didn't do anything with Pentagon spending.
No,
and they failed all these audits. It was like last time people studied it, they said there was $21 trillion missing from it. Or is that what it is yet? I forget the amount, but it's a massive amount, and that's food, not bombs, right? And so it's now you have to hate Tesla. It's so people are like team players way too much, and it blinds them. And right now I had a really dear friend. He was really wanted me to I mentioned that I did not want to support Joe Biden because he was saying we got to get out there and we got to go door to door, and he was like advocating that. And I commented, I said, I don't think that's a wise idea. Joe he's like funding a genocide right now, and he started the war against Russia. He was like the vice president working with Newland in the coup, the last coup, and Food Not Bombs was involved in the first coup and was freaked out at the end of it, because we fed the Orange Revolution for 100 days in Kiev and Maidan Square, and then afterwards we realized we were like duped by NGOs funded by, and you can't say George Soros because he's, you know, and he's like an anti-communist, you know, philanthropist for basically Democratic Party.
I want to watch the world burn down-ist is what he is. He's nothing. He literally just wants to watch the collapse of America, of the West. George Soros he's just a demon.
Yeah, I mean, this funding of the, so I have a Substack, anarchistcook.blog is my blog, and I have a Substack called Anarchist Cook. But I think the if you have to do Substack Keith McHenry to find it, I guess. I don't know how that works, but I write for it. And I'm a boomer. So anyway, I have a whole thing on Indivisible and the, you know, and the connection between, you know, how, so the USAID, the NGOs in Georgia, see, because it's really important for the United States to, because the U.S., it needs to believes or whatever, for whatever reason, they need to overthrow Georgia and Ukraine, and those are the two red lines of Russia, right, and NATO expansion. But I spent a lot of time in so when food not bombs in Ukraine, one day I'm like watching this video that I think it was like from that day or maybe a day before, May 3rd of 2014, and I see like all these soccer hooligans in the stadium in that's what they were calling them in Odessa, and they're the team from Kiev, and they're all going Z Kyle, you know, and then they all march out of the stadium and they march towards this tent encampment at this trade union hall, and they end up like, you know, like killing over 40 people there. But there was a bunch of people with these red and black flags in the group. And it's like, why are, and red and black flags are typically anarchist flags. So I write Food Not Bombs kids, the anarchist friends in Kiev, what is going on that you've got anarchists marching with Nazis to this trade union hall and then killing people? And they email me back and they go, those are not anarchists. That's Azov battalion. I don't know if they were called a battalion at that time, but they became that if they weren't. And they said these are the ones that are attacking us in Kiev when we're trying to feed people, because we're feeding gay people and people of color, and so they come to and terrorize us. So it's like, wow, that's really interesting. And so, you know, when I just, and then I follow that, and then I see like that movie by Ukraine on Fire. But then I also know from talking to the Kiev people about the Orange Revolution that there's already this tendency towards U.S. coups, and then there's also the you know, in Ukraine, of course, the U.S. likes to coup a lot of places, and then and so you know, so I have a pretty good opinion by the time the special military operation rolls around, that there are Nazis in Ukraine, that's not Russian propaganda. I'm getting that from Ukrainians. And of course, the Western media had lots of stories about how Nazis were so dominant in Ukraine before the special military operation, right?
Right. The New York Times had a huge article. Yeah. And that, you know, here in Santa Cruz, we were trying to have Scott Horton do a live stream at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, and the nice young man there, the new guy, like books the space, was all happy about that. And we chose a date and everything. We're starting to just about to promote it, and they contact us and say, "Oh no, Scott Horton and the book Provoked. It just doesn't go with our, you know, idea of things, so we're not going to let you do that." Now the weird thing is, one of the other staff people or board members, and they're the ones that kicked Brave and Free out of there for being transphobic, and yeah, they're just, it's unbelievable. And we've been connected, me and my girlfriend have been connected to the Resource Center for Nonviolence for like 30 years, and now we can't even book the place anymore because we're not
right-minded, and and so it's like you would think there was anti-war. So then there was like Code Pink called for this big national protest against the U.S. war against Russia. I guess is how it was presented. I forget how it was presented, but that was basically it. I was in support of it. And so we go to the protests, and I was one of the people that helped promote it and everything. And about half the people there have Ukrainian flags, and they have these signs that say about like basically a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and I'm
a U.S. imposed no-fly zone,
correct,
which would directly draw us into war with Russia.
Exactly, and I'm thinking this does not. I'm an anti-war activist. One of the last things I want is a nuclear conflict between the U.S. and Russia. Doesn't sound good to me, and so anyway, I go to the staff, the board member from the resource center, because he's kind of I'm like going, this is crazy. We have half the rally is for the war, half the rally is against the war. This is frightening. And the poor guy is so naive, because I guess he just listens to NPR and reads the New York Times, that he's like, oh no, these are good guys, we have to support them. And so I got to talking to him, and they're all proud to show me their Facebook page with their Azov flags on them and stuff. All of them were fucking Nazis.
Justin Trudeau pinned a medal on one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you have they had a standing ovation for a former SS officer, and then you have what's that comedian gives a medal to an Azov commander at Disney World who's got amputated leg or something. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, Jon Stewart. It's like this whole, and it's like, and then they're calling everybody that's a Nazi. And all the right wing is a Nazi, but you're funding Nazis. You're giving heavy weapons to Nazis who are now, giving them to their Nazi friends throughout Europe and the Americas. I mean, what do you? And you don't have any accounting for what you're doing, and
they're supporting Nazis and then calling people that didn't want to take the vaccine Nazis. They're calling Elon Musk Nazis. Like you, I'm not. I have a lot of criticisms of Elon Musk, but I also recognize the good things that he's done, like get the people out of that stranded space station that just nobody.
Yeah, that was good.
About.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Hey, that's probably a good thing. Biden could have done that at any point, and he just didn't because he didn't want to make Elon look good. And
he didn't want to look Russia good or blah blah blah. Right? Yeah, it's some kind of stupid Cold War thing that they're doing. Yeah. Yeah,
the whole thing.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. Is this a 3-hour podcast or a 4-hour podcast? It looks like a 3-hour podcast to me.
Yeah, I'm already a bit over, and there's
over.
Million.
It's 2:51 right now.
I usually only go 2 hours, but with guests I sort of just go as long as we want to go. But I do have to cut it probably at 3 hours because there's also, there's a bunch of stuff that I didn't even get to talk to you about.
Well, we can do another one another time. Yeah, because it's
soon. And actually, I want to come meet you in person.
Oh yeah, you've got to meet me.
I want to. So I went down to the clock tower a couple Saturdays ago, and I just last Saturday, and I just went and
you were there last Saturday.
Yeah, and good people out there. People who would probably hate me if they knew my opinions, but good people what they're doing out there and stuff. So it was nice to see. But when you're going to be out at one of those, or if there's any of these anything anti-war, I'm there. So
well, if you wanted to come to if you're free on Tuesday night at 6:00 at the Aptos Grange, that is going to be our anti-war presentation. I'm guaranteed to be there because I'm coordinating a lot of the program. The town clock's harder to catch me. If you stay there the whole time, I will pass through, but I'm the guy running out to get tents and sleeping bags. I'm the guy going to deal with the thing, and I love being there. I hate when I have to run in there because it is such a it's a sense of community. See, that is a problem for the state. One of the biggest problems, particularly with COVID, we did free concerts at Food Not Bombs at the meal at every holiday through all of COVID. And we had all these people there hanging out, talking to each other. So that dividing people you're only on your laptop or you're only on your phone and you're locked in your house. The homeless people within an hour of COVID lockdown were like, this is a scam. No, I didn't know anybody on the streets that originally thought they should get an injection or anything like that. They thought this is some kind of psychops. That's what everybody was saying on the streets. And I had like about 150 to 200 people hanging with me every day. We called it the Homeless Union COVID Relief Center. It was something like that for a while. And we were open 24 hours a day for the first like week. But then we were like, oh, this is way out of control. So we did it every day for 3 years without fail. But eventually some homeless people would, I met 2 homeless people that got COVID, 2 out of the 150 to 200 that hang out with me. And they were inside and they said they had COVID, but who knows? One person had it for like 24 hours and she was an employee at one of the shelters, at the Vets Hall shelter. And then another one was stuck in another shelter doing, and they were the 2, but they might not have had anything. Who knows what they had? It might have been the flu like everybody, whatever.
I didn't get it for 4 years.
Yeah. I have a friend that was masked or never masked, and he never got COVID or any illness of it. Yeah. It's basically, it seemed like, I never got COVID, it seemed really hard to get COVID. I mean, if you want, I wanted COVID at one point because I'd read about this thing where if you got proof of COVID, they wouldn't jack you up in Europe traveling because you had the antibodies in, and I couldn't get it. So I was like, well, screw this, man. I hope for something different. You can't even get COVID if you want it. That shows you something's wrong. And because I figured I'd just have the antibodies, prove that I got COVID, and then not have to get vaccinated. But and still travel in Europe. But yeah, I never. It's all of it is a giant psychops. So my big message is we got to stop the wars, and we need unity, and we need to stop like being in this left right thing. See,
we don't have to agree on everything.
Right.
That's
Right.
the thing.
Yeah. And you don't have to hate somebody because you have a different opinion and think that they're a monster or something. I mean, unless you're like really into the genocide, I can be against you there. But, murdering people, stuff like that overtly, but
that's the thing for me that was really hard with COVID is because I grew up in California. I'm born and raised here. I've never left. Played sports. My dad was a deadhead. I quit drinking, a few years before COVID started ultra marathon running, and I'm in the healthiest place of my life. And then all of a sudden I'm being attacked by people that I've known all my life because I didn't want to take this injection. And for the most part, these are people that aren't healthy. They weren't like healthy individuals. And I'm like, look, I'm not scared of COVID. I'm not like we're a year and a half out when they started like really pushing the vaccines really hard. What variant were we on by that point? COVID wasn't even that dangerous anymore. And it was like the whole thing was like this psychological mass panic that was created. What did Carl Malone, I think, is the Dr. Malone, whatever his name is, came out with mass formation, formation psychosis.
Right.
And it was,
that's a different person, but yeah, I know what you mean. It wasn't Malone, but it's I have that book, and that was a great. Yeah, who was that guy? That wasn't.
Yeah,
he's a guy from Belgium.
It wasn't Malone. It was
but that was a good book.
Lonnie, if you're still watching, I think you Peter McCullough, Dr. Peter McCullough.
No, he didn't write mass formation, but he talked about the guy that wrote that book a lot. And
no, not the book. He's just the one that the first person I heard say that. But it was this mass psychosis. Yeah, it was
and it still is. It's crazy. There's still like how can you be still wearing a mask and demanding people wear masks? I mean, I've got a guy trolling me. It's like when I advertised soup stock, he says I'm a eugenics anti-masker, and he keeps commenting on my Facebook page, and he's doing Food Not Bombs in someplace, hassling me about it. And it's just like, whatever. But yeah, and the fact that the anarchist community became so authoritarian when that's the exact opposite of our ideology, that freaked me out.
it's funny because right before COVID started, I really started getting into Michael Malice. And
Uh-huh.
I've been sort of looking for like my political philosophy for a long time. And it really took COVID for me to understand like, oh, this is what the state overstepping its authority looks like. And it really, that's when I started. And for a bit, I thought I was an anarchist. I'm not. I'm a libertarian. Like I'm still trying to figure out what is the best solution for governing or not governing a society. You know, I'm still trying to figure out my political philosophy, but it's just ironic that I started studying what anarchism actually is right before COVID happened, and then all of a sudden we became super authoritarian. It was just
It's
it
frightening.
was bizarre. I got the whole reason my like Twitter account and everything blew up. I don't know if you know this because I got fired for refusing to wear a mask and this is all the way.
I missed that one. Where were you working? Or are you allowed to say that?
I was working for a company called Amplified Lifestyles, and it was residential audio video. We did like really high-end smart homes. And some of the clients whose homes that I worked on for months, sometimes years, were clients that you mentioned in this podcast already. So like our clientele was really high-end clientele. But this was February of 2023. So Biden had already said like COVID's over. I'm working in Pacific Heights in San Francisco. And it was this insane true 3-story house with a basement, and the attic was converted into another floor with a rooftop deck overlooking the Palace of Fine Arts. You know, you can see Alcatraz.
Oh, wow,
see
beautiful.
Angel Island. It was beautiful. It was an incredible house, multi-million-dollar house. And I'd been working on this job site for like 3 or 4 months already. We did the pre-wire, you know, it was all in construction. So we wired up the whole house, and that part of the job ended. And then I got called back to go there like a month later to go move some wires around because they changed the location of some things. So I go back there, we walk in, the guy I'm working with comes up to me and he's like, hey, they got a mask mandate here. And he hands me a mask. And I had like recently, seriously, probably a few days or even a week before, just decided I'm done. I'm not doing any of this shit anymore. I'm not complying. I'm not taking another test. I'm not putting a mask on. I'm fucking done. And then that happens. He hands me a mask and I like smiling, looking at him. This is my coworker. I just go, I will not comply. You know, and I say it kind of like a smirk on my face. Also, the foreman comes like running around the corner and he just starts laying into me saying, we've already had 1 COVID case on this site. If we get 3, the city of San Francisco will shut the job site down. He goes off for like 2 minutes. And I'm just sitting there on the floor, like on one knee, getting my tools ready. And when he's done, I was just like, okay, well, what does that have to do with me wearing a mask? And that just set him off, fucking set him off. And he goes around the corner, he calls my project manager. And my project manager, who I've known for 15 years because I've been working with him at other companies, he calls me and he just goes, what did you do? And it was hilarious. And I was like, I'm not going to do it, dude. And then the owner of the company calls me, he says, go home. You're furloughed. He's pissed off. He's super pissed off. And I actually got a really good relationship with this guy. And I'm driving home. The HR, his wife, who's the head of HR, calls me. She was like, you're not furloughed. You're not fired. Just come in tomorrow. We're going to talk about what happened. And, you know, we'll put it behind us or whatever. I get home and I'm like, I'm getting fired tomorrow. Like, I know I'm getting fired. So I clean out my van and take all my tools out. I get it all ready to like turn in because I just figured I was going to get fired. I go in there and at first they weren't going to fire me. And they said, we're going to give you a write-up. You got to sign this write-up. And part of this is you saying that you have to be willing to abide by company policies moving forward. And I was like, okay, that's fine, but I'm not going to wear a mask. And they're like, oh, it's company policy. This is something you have. And I was like, show me where it says that it's company policy that I have to wear a mask. Like, show me in the handbook. And they're like, okay, well, if you're not willing to do this, we're going to have to consider it a separation. I was like, well, I'm not quitting. I just told them I'm not quitting. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to have to consider this a termination. So they fired me, and I still have my work van, so they had to send the warehouse guy home behind me to like pick up the work van when I got home. And as I was driving home, I made a video just venting about the whole thing, you know. And we're still in pretty peak hysteria. This is still 2023. People are still going insane. This was like the ivermectin time when everybody was calling it horse paste and shit. I called my best friend first, and my best friend's just like, you just make a video and put it out on Twitter. I had like 400 followers on Twitter. So I make a video, I put it out, like I make it while I'm driving and I hit post while I'm driving. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but it's like a 3-minute video. I get home the thing had gone fucking bonkers and it went everywhere. I got a call from Tucker Carlson's booking agent, and all of a sudden Tucker Carlson wants me on the show. I went on his show, and then like everything exploded from there. But a year after that, nobody would hire me. I could not. I'm like blacklisted from the residential AV industry. So I went back to commercial AV, and fortunately, I'm with a really cool company now. But yeah, that's
great. Well, unfortunately, I have to go to the bathroom real bad.
So do I. Yeah.
So visit me at foodnotbombs.net and come to the Aptos Grange this Tuesday for our anti-war thing at Brave and Free Santa Cruz.
Awesome. All right, where can people find you?
Foodnotbombs.net is the best, or anarchistcook.blog.
Okay, cool. All right, really quick before you leave, every show I have to end a joke with the greatest book ever written, The Truth About Chuck Norris. So really quick, I know you got to pee, so I'll go fast. Random joke. Chuck Norris doesn't have normal white blood cells like you and me. He has a small black ring around them. This signifies that they are black belts and they will roundhouse kick the shit out of viruses. That's why Chuck Norris never gets ill.
That's beautiful. Great. Thanks for having me, man. Bye-bye.
Right.
I better run. I'm desperate now.
Thanks for hanging out, everybody.